Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Charlotte Mulhall. In March 2005, a gruesome murder occurred in Ireland when a fisherman made a disturbing discovery in a canal. He initially thought he had found a mannequin, but upon closer inspection, he realized it was part of a human leg wearing a sock. He immediately contacted the police. The subsequent investigation revealed many details about this infamous case. The Mulhall family lived in South Dublin, Ireland, consisting of parents John and Kathleen and their 6 children, 3 daughters and 3 sons. The family faced challenges related to alcohol and substance abuse. Both parents drank regularly, and their arguments often became loud and violent, all in front of the children, despite their troubled marriage. John and Kathleen remained together for 27 years. However, by the early 2000s, when their children were grown, they decided to divorce due to financial issues, but continued to live together. At first, it seemed that family life was getting better. However, in 2002, Kathleen introduced her new boyfriend, Farah Swala Noor, who was 14 years her junior. Kathleen's ex-husband, John, felt uncomfortable having a stranger in his home, especially since Farah was now sharing a bed with Kathleen. In response, John decided to leave and move in with his girlfriend. Unfortunately, his new partner soon kicked him out of the house, and he spent a year wandering around Dublin before returning home. Luckily for John, by that time, Kathleen and Farah had moved into a rented flat in another area of Dublin. Farah arrived in Ireland in December 1996 under the false name Shalila Salim. He claimed to be from Somalia and said that his entire family had died in the Civil War. In fact, he was from Kenya and his family still lived there. Farah had a record of minor crimes, and when his deception was discovered, he faced deportation. He successfully appealed the decision in March 1999. He married a Dublin resident, and they had a child together, which enabled him to obtain Irish citizenship after naturalization. Farah left his wife and began living a chaotic life, relying on odd jobs and petty theft to make ends meet. Farah had a violent past, including an incident in which he abused a mentally disabled Chinese woman, although she bore him a son. Farah escaped punishment for his actions. Reports suggest he harbored a deep hatred for women. In 2002, Farah met Kathleen, and they began a tumultuous relationship. Both were unemployed and relied on odd jobs to make ends meet. Their shared love of alcohol initially bonded them, but over time, their difficult personalities led to frequent arguments, which Kathleen's children often witnessed. Kathleen's eldest daughter, Linda, was born in 1975. She dropped out of school at a young age, by the age of 24. She had 4 children and often forgot the names of her boyfriends due to a series of short-lived relationships. Linda also served a short prison sentence for theft and struggled with alcohol and drug addiction. Linda's younger sister, Charlotte, had her own legal troubles, with around 7 convictions for theft, property damage, escort services, and other misdemeanors. Like Linda, Charlotte also struggled with serious addiction issues. The other siblings also had their own legal problems, and none were considered positive role models. On Sunday, March 20, 2005, Linda invited Charlotte to her apartment. While they were talking in the kitchen, Charlotte suggested that they start celebrating her birthday, which was the next day. At first, Linda refused because she had been abstaining from alcohol for 3 weeks to regain custody of her children, who were in a shelter. However, the temptation to drink became too strong, and half an hour later, they opened a bottle of hard liquor to start the birthday celebration. A few hours later, the sisters decided to visit their mother and her partner, Farah. When they called their mother, they found out that Kathleen and Farah were at a bar in central Dublin. Without hesitation, the sisters joined them. It turned out that Kathleen and Farah had been celebrating St. Patrick's Day for 4 consecutive days. After meeting Linda and Charlotte at the bar, the family did not stay long and decided to continue celebrating at a nearby park. However, Farah got into an argument with some locals, forcing the family to stay out of trouble and decide to go home. The four of them returned to Kathleen and Farah's rented apartment. They prepared food and set the table to celebrate Charlotte's upcoming birthday. When everything was ready, Farah fell asleep to lift Farah's spirits. Kathleen slipped a pill into his drink. Although the ecstasy worked, things did not go as they had expected. A moment later, Linda, who was sitting on the sofa, suddenly felt Farah caress and squeeze her legs. Then he put his arm around her waist and whispered inappropriate words into her ear. At first, Linda did not want to cause a scandal, so she reminded Farah to behave after witnessing Farah's inappropriate actions. Linda openly asked him to take his hands off her, realizing that the situation was escalating. Kathleen and Charlotte began to insult Farah and asked him to behave properly. The argument quickly turned into a fight. Then, Farah grabbed Kathleen, causing her to scream for help to her daughters. In response, Charlotte pulled a knife from her pocket and attacked Farah, seeing her sister Charlotte in danger. Linda rushed to the pantry and grabbed a large iron hammer under the influence of alcohol. Linda lost control of her actions. Soon, the floors, walls, and rooms were in chaos. Meanwhile, the girl's mother, Kathleen, sat in a chair, holding a glass and watching her two daughters attack Farah. Eventually, she grew tired of the commotion and turned her attention to the television, where an entertainment program was playing. After the altercation, the sisters began to understand what had happened, and panic set in. Kathleen stepped in to help and gave Linda and Charlotte a plan for how to dispose of Farah's body. Kathleen said that no one would charge them with murder if Farah's body was not found. So Linda and Charlotte spent the next 5 hours in the bathroom processing the body. During this time, Kathleen took a nap. When Kathleen woke up, she found 7 black plastic bags in the hallway. She called her ex-husband John to tell him about the nightmare that had unfolded in their rented apartment. John was skeptical and did not believe her at first. However, when he arrived and saw the scene from the front door, he realized it was no joke. He declared that he would not participate and went home. After a short break, Kathleen and her 2 daughters began a thorough cleaning of the apartment. They used brooms and several gallons of bleach to meticulously wipe down every surface. At noon on March 21, Kathleen, Linda, and Charlotte left the rented apartment, each carrying a sports bag containing black trash bags. They walked to the nearest river channel and, unnoticed, threw 6 black bags into the water. The women then went to a restaurant. Afterward, they took a bus for about an hour to the city center. Once there, they stopped at a large store, browsed several areas, withdrew money from an ATM, and went to a park. In the park, they dug a shallow hole with a knife and buried the last bag. They eventually threw the knife and hammer into a nearby pond before returning home. Over the next few days, Kathleen and her daughters focused on cleaning the rental apartment. Kathleen bought a large amount of cleaning supplies. She later admitted that there was a terrible, nauseating smell in the room that no cleaning product could remove. Kathleen and Charlotte coped with the smell by drinking and using drugs to forget it. However, Linda was very distressed, crying constantly and unable to calm down. 10 days later, one of the bags that Kathleen and her daughters had thrown into the Dublin Canal floated to the surface. A local fisherman discovered it and quickly called the police to report the incident. When the police arrived, they drained the canal, and divers searched the area, eventually finding 6 black bags containing the man's body. A forensic expert determined that the man had suffered 28 injuries due to the brutal nature of the case. The police initially speculated that he may have died during a witchcraft ritual, but later ruled this theory out after consulting with experts. The police knew they needed to solve the case by identifying the victim. However, the DNA database did not have any matches for the body. Therefore, officers decided to take a different approach. They shared descriptions and photos of the items found in the victim's bag through social media. Among these items, was a torn T-shirt with the logo of an Irish football club. This shirt helped identify the victim as Farah Swaleh Noor. As one of his old friends from Somalia recognized it, this friend also mentioned that Farah had been missing for several weeks and had stopped answering calls. Police discovered that Farah had been living with a girlfriend named Kathleen Mulhall for the past few years. This information prompted further investigation. Samalit received a cash reward for helping to locate Kathleen, while two others, Linda and Charlotte, were brought in for questioning. All three denied any involvement, and the police had no evidence to charge the women. So they were released the same day. In July 2005, one of Kathleen's sons, who was serving time in prison for a traffic violation, informed a guard that his mother and sisters had killed Farah. He claimed that during a prison visit, Kathleen had confessed to the crime to him. Following this revelation, the police searched Kathleen's apartment and discovered traces of Farah's blood. In August 2005, Kathleen, Linda, and Charlotte were again questioned at the police station. They maintained their innocence, and the interrogation lasted 12 hours. Kathleen and her two daughters, Linda and Charlotte, were then released. During this time, Linda, who was extremely remorseful, called the police at the end of August and confessed to the crime, leading them to the park where they had buried a black bag that eventually contained Farah's body. However, it is believed that the black bag was unearthed and moved to another location shortly after Linda's confession. In September 2005, Kathleen Mulhall fled to England. In December 2005, Linda and Charlotte were arrested and charged with murder. Shortly afterward, their biological father, John, who was looking after the four children on his own, died. It is believed that he had nothing to do with the crime. Linda and Charlotte's trial began in October 2006, with Linda facing a charge of manslaughter and Charlotte charged with attempted murder. During the trial, both women claimed they acted in self-defense, maintained their innocence, and stated that they were trying to protect their mother. After a brief deliberation, the jury found Charlotte Mulhall and Linda Mulhall guilty. The judge sentenced Linda to 15 years in prison, while Charlotte received a life sentence. It was reported that both sisters had exhibited poor behavior while incarcerated in a women's prison in Dublin. One day, Linda injured her hand and spent several weeks in the hospital. Charlotte attracted media attention after a photograph was released of Charlotte attacking a male prisoner. The incident led to increased security measures at all prisons in Ireland, and Charlotte was subsequently transferred to a higher security facility in Limerick. Kathleen Mulhall's story began when she fled Ireland in September 2005 and assumed a new identity in the UK. However, in January 2008, a reporter discovered her location and reported her to the police. As a result, Kathleen was forced to return to Ireland, where she faced numerous charges. She confessed to helping her daughters dispose of their bodies and clean their apartment. In May 2009, Kathleen was sentenced to 5 years in prison, but was released after serving only 2 years. After her release in October 2011, she returned to the UK and moved in with her son, James. At that time, James's family consisted of his 6 children and the 4 children of his sister, Linda. He adopted Linda's children after she was arrested. After Kathleen arrived, tensions rose between James and his live-in girlfriend, eventually leading to an incident in which he assaulted her and was subsequently imprisoned. Kathleen later suffered severe kidney failure and underwent an organ transplant in Dublin. She now lives in her hometown, where she continues to receive treatment. Linda was released early from her sentence that same year. She now lives with her children and her new partner. Linda does not give interviews to journalists. In a recent statement to the media, she said, "She have served my sentence. Let she live in peace after all. This is she personal life, and it is none of your." Since March 2023, Charlotte has been allowed to leave prison for 1 day. Under close supervision by guards, she may soon be eligible for parole. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Julia Niswinder. Julia Niswinder was born in 1989 in the small town of Monroe, which has a population of 20,000. She has a twin sister named Jennifer. The girls were raised by their grandparents while their mother was building her personal life. Kim had given birth to them at 15, claiming she was raped at 14 by a guy she barely knew. However, relatives say he was someone familiar and close to the family. Regardless, he avoided taking responsibility. After discovering her pregnancy, Kim decided she wasn't ready to be a mother and entrusted her daughters to her parents. The grandparents became their official guardians and raised them as their own children. When the children grew up, their mother remarried Jim, who worked in the cleaning business, and they had another daughter. By then, Jennifer was already attending school and living with her mother. While Julia spent a lot of time with her grandparents on her mother's side. In high school, things changed. According to her mother, Julia became defiant and uncontrollable, often arguing with her twin sister, Jennifer. Eventually, their mother grew tired of the constant fights between the daughters. Their house was small, with only 2 bedrooms and a living room, so she couldn't give the older daughters separate rooms. As a result, she decided to send Julia to live with her grandparents again. Julia was happy to return to grandparents. She lived there for a while, and her grandparents indulged her and were very affectionate toward her. At that time, Julia became very concerned about her appearance and tried to lose weight. She followed strict diets, restricted herself in almost everything, and ate very little. Her grandma was worried about her, but Julia assured her that she was fine. At 19 years old, Julia needed to make her own life decisions. She enrolled at Eastern Michigan University in the journalism faculty and continued living with her grandmother. Julia dreamed of becoming a TV presenter. She became close to Jennifer and her mother but did not want to return home. The 2 sisters became closer, sharing secrets, experiences and events in their lives. Julia later moved to a room on the campus of a university in the small town of Salanta, Michigan. She was fortunate to get a room with a bathroom. Julia also got a job with her mother at Ulmert. Her new place was a 45-minute drive from her mother's house. Her neighbors were girls she got along with well. On Thursday, December 6, 2012, with Christmas and the holidays approaching, Julia's neighbors left for the weekend to visit their families. Julia visited her mother's family. They had already set up a Christmas tree and began decorating it and the house together. They all enjoyed hot chocolate and listened to Christmas songs, creating a festive atmosphere and having a wonderful time together. On Friday, December 7th, she visited her mother's workplace and they went shopping for presents together. Julia and her mother then went home together, and an argument broke out that turned into a fight. The exact details of the incident remain unclear. Julia left the house in distress, drove to her grandmother's house, and expressed that she never wanted to return to that house again. Her grandmother comforted her, invited her to stay, and together they decorated the Christmas tree and the house. Julia's mother later visited her grandparents and reassured Julia that she had misunderstood the situation. Julia's grandmother listened to both sides and sensed that something was wrong. When her mother left, Julia stayed with her grandmother. The next day, December 8th, Julia went to work. She saw her mother there but did not speak to her. As they passed each other, Julia's mother told her that she loved her. After her shift, Julia went home. During her lunch break, she met her sister Jennifer at a coffee shop and mentioned her plans for the evening, saying that she was going to meet a guy after work. But she kept the details a secret. Julia was very private about her personal life, so it was not surprising that Julia kept the information secret with Jennifer. After meeting with Jennifer, she rushed to the car without putting on her coat, despite the cold weather. The last time Jennifer spoke to Julia was around 11 p.m. when Julia returned home from her date. Their conversation was brief. Julia simply said, "I'm home," before hanging up. Julia was very tired and she needed to study for an exam the next day, December 9th. After working at Walmart, she went shopping and then returned home. That night, she ran into a neighbor returned from visiting her family. The neighbor was getting ready to sleep at her boyfriend's house. Julia closed the bedroom door and was about to go to sleep. While the neighbor was getting ready, she heard the TV playing loudly in Julia's room. This made her feel strange because she had never seen Julia watching TV before, especially when it was time to go to bed. However, the neighbor was in a hurry to meet her boyfriend, so she didn't investigate further and left the house. On Monday morning, December 10th, 2012, a neighbor returned from a family visit. She quickly showered to go to school. While getting ready, she noticed that Julia's alarm clock kept ringing, but no one seemed to have turned it off. Knowing that Julia often struggled to wake up in the morning, the neighbor was not surprised. She knocked on Julia's door to try to wake her up, but received no response. After a while, she decided not to bother her anymore and went to school. That day, Julia did not go to class and also missed an important exam, which was unusual for her, as she had never been absent or late for an exam before. Julia missed her shift at her stepfather's cleaning company, where she had taken a part-time job to earn money before the holidays. Although she was scheduled to work, she did not show up. She also missed her shift at Walmart that evening, which raised concerns among her coworkers. The next day, December 11th, Julia missed her shift for the second time. Her coworkers grew increasingly concerned and tried to reach her by phone, but no one answered. An employee had Julia's mother's phone number and called her that evening to inform her that Julia had missed 2 shifts. Julia's mother, Kim, was at a cafe playing darts with Jennifer and other relatives at the time. She noted that their schedules often didn't align, and it was common for them to go 2 or 3 days without seeing or calling each other. When Kim learned that Julia was missing and not responding to calls, she panicked and tried to reach her daughter repeatedly, but all her calls went to voicemail. Concerned, Kim called Julia's friend Rachel and asked her to check on Julia. Rachel agreed and went to Julia's house around 9 p.m. Rachel found Julia's car parked in the driveway next to the house, but no one answered the door or the phone. Concerned, Rachel sought out a security guard for assistance. She asked the guard to open Julia's room to check, but he refused and instead called the police. The guard could not find a spare key to Julia's room. When the police arrived, they broke down the door and entered the apartment. Inside the bedroom, everything was in disarray, furniture was scattered on the floor. And Julia's handbag was on the bed, making it look like a robbery had taken place. As the police continued their search of the apartment, they made a dreadful discovery. They found the body of the Julia face down in the bathtub. Her body was fully submerged, and her hands were behind her back with her feet together. There were signs of restraint on her wrists and ankles. A phone was also found underwater beneath her body. Julia's torn clothes were on the bathroom floor, and it was evident that the fabric had been cut with a knife. After examining her, the police concluded that her body had likely been in the water for 2 days and was in a state of advanced decomposition. The knife and rope used to tie up Julia were not found anywhere in the apartment. All of Julia's valuables, including her wallet with cash, laptop, and car keys, were still on the table, and the wrapped Christmas presents were untouched. The only items missing were the pillowcase and the keys to Julia's room, which led investigators to rule out the possibility of a robbery. Rachel learned the tragic news from the police and immediately informed Julia's mother about her daughter's death. Kim and Jennifer quickly got into their car and drove to Julia's apartment. Despite the police cordon, the mother and sister approached the building to find out what had happened. They tried to enter the room but were stopped by the police. The family demanded answers about Julia, but no one would give them any information. They were distraught and pressed the police for information, but the police only confirmed that Julia was dead. Police took Julia's family to the station along with her neighbors for questioning. Julia's neighbors said they generally got along with her, although they had had a conflict in the past. They had resolved their differences and had not had any problems since. The neighbors said they were not home when the murder occurred and provided a confirmed alibi, clearing them of any suspicion. Forensic experts examined the crime scene and found no signs of forced entry. All windows and doors were locked. Julia's room was on the first floor, leading police to speculate that she may have opened the door herself and that the attacker was likely someone she knew. At the crime scene, police discovered bloody rubber gloves, male biological fluids, and 3 DNA samples on the gloves. The evidence was analyzed, revealing that 1 DNA sample belonged to Julia, while the other 2 came from an unidentified male. One of the samples was too decomposed to be identifiable, and there was no record of the second male DNA sample in the police database. Notably, the biological fluids belonged to a man who had had a vasectomy, suggesting that he was not a father. This led police to conclude that the suspect was likely an older man rather than a younger one, as vasectomies are not typically performed at a young age. As a result, police focused their search on adult men who knew Julia. An autopsy revealed that Julia died from strangulation. She had been strangled before being thrown into the water. The potential suspect had turned up the volume on the television on the day of the crime to drown out any screams she may have made during the struggle. A toxicology report confirmed that there were no traces of alcohol or illegal drugs in her system. While the police continued their investigation, Julia's family decided to conduct their own investigation to find out the truth. They posted leaflets and appealed to the public for help through the media and social networks. But these efforts did not help their investigation. Police discovered that the girl had been dating a young man shortly before the murder. Police checked Julia's phone and identified the man, taking him in for questioning. However, he was soon released, as he had a solid alibi that cleared him of suspicion. Police found Julia's stepfather, Jim, suspicious, as he appeared unusually calm and did not seem to be grieving over Julia's death. He was familiar with her house and could have easily gained access to the apartment, as Julia may have let him in herself. People who knew him described him as strange, reclusive, and unsociable. Everyone kept their distance from Jim, especially after the Jim had a vasectomy following the birth of his daughter with Kim. This made him the primary suspect in the investigation. When Julia's mother, Kim, and her sister Jennifer found out about the suspicions surrounding Jim, they strongly defended him, believing he was innocent. Kim argued that she had trouble sleeping at night and frequently got up to use the bathroom due to health issues. She insisted that she would have noticed if Jim had left the bed that night, but he stayed with her the entire time. Kim rejected all allegations against Jim, explaining that she had previously been a victim of violence. She stated that if she had sensed any danger from Jim, she would never have allowed him near her daughters. Julia's grandparents were very concerned about her and decided to speak up. They informed the police about a fight that occurred at Julia's parents' house a few days before the tragedy. Although Julia didn't provide details about the conflict, she did say she would never return to that house. This raised questions about whether she had discovered something troubling or if there was another reason that led Jim to want to eliminate her. The grandparents noted that Kim and Jim's marriage was on the brink of divorce, as they frequently argued, and Kim had expressed that Jim might leave her. They hadn't shared a bedroom for a long time, making it difficult for Kim to know if Jim was home that night. This could explain Kim's intense protectiveness of her husband. She might have been trying to save their marriage or covering for him. In the early days after the incident, the police prevented Julia's mother and stepfather from entering her room where the crime took place, as they were collecting evidence and information. Despite this, Kim and Jim attempted to gain access to the room and were eventually successful, although Kim later said she did not remember how they got in. The police were surprised because they had not been granted permission to enter the room. Once inside, her parents immediately began unpacking and cleaning the room. First, they dumped a large bag of trash in the bathroom. After the cleanup, much of the original crime scene became untraceable. Additionally, Julia's car, which she had saved up to buy and was still paying for, was quickly sold by her parents, on the grounds that they could no longer afford the loan. This raised significant suspicions. The FBI eventually got involved. Forensic experts concluded that Jim was the prime suspect. Julia's maternal grandfather, James, noticed that Jim had a very strict parenting style, often making her cry and cornering her. James suspected that Jim might be punishing his daughter harshly behind closed doors. It was also revealed that Jim had been a karate instructor and the children had reported their mother for his brutal treatment. Jim had trained his daughter rigorously, helping her achieve a black belt in karate. The police asked Jim to provide a DNA sample, which he readily provided to clear his name. However, his DNA did not match that of the second man found on the glove. As time passed, the investigation stalled, and the case seemed to have been forgotten by everyone except the grandparents. They regularly asked the police for any updates and expressed their frustration at the lack of progress. Julia's grandparents still believed that the police should thoroughly investigate Jim, her stepfather. James suspected that Jim may have taken latex gloves from a cleaner at work to frame someone else while concealing his own involvement. However, this theory was never pursued further. It left many unanswered questions, such as whose DNA was on the damaged glove. It raised the possibility that there could have been two criminals involved. They asked Jim to take a lie detector test, which he passed twice, but Julia's grandfather remained skeptical. He still believed that Jim was somehow involved in Julia's murder. James' persistent attempts to communicate with the police about the investigation led them to stop contacting him. This decision upset only Julia's mother. Living in Florida, James was unable to visit the police in person, which resulted in him losing access to important information and feeling powerless. His daughter Kim and granddaughters, Jennifer and Madison, wrote to James to say he was no longer part of their family, which hurt him deeply. One of Julia's friends informed the police that Julia had reported harassment from her stepfather, who referred to Julia as his girlfriend, causing her fear. This suggested a possible sexual motive for the murder, prompting the police to seek a search warrant for Jim's home. During the search of his laptop, they discovered numerous explicit photos of minors. Jim was arrested due to these photos. At first, he claimed he was innocent, insisting that he did not know where the photos came from and that he was being framed. Later, he conceded that the photos might belong to him but insisted he was unaware that the subjects were minors. He maintained his innocence and was found not guilty because the prosecution failed to prove that the photos showed minors. Later, Julia's friend withdrew her accusations against her stepfather, although police informed her that her previous statements had been recorded. James discovered that Kim and Jennifer spoke to this friend and likely pressured her to change her testimony. Despite everything, Kim continues to support her husband and believes in his innocence. She thinks that her neighbor is responsible for her daughter's death due to a disagreement. However, this theory is not taken seriously because the neighbor has an alibi, and only male DNA was found at the crime scene. 3 years after Julia's murder, in 2015, Kim and Jim's attorney advised them not to give a written statement because it could be used against them in court. James was even more angry when he heard this. He felt that if they had nothing to hide, they would not have hired an attorney or refused to give a written statement, because giving false testimony could have legal consequences. By insisting on giving a statement, they avoided potential liability. It was later discovered that the police had overlooked a crucial piece of evidence. It was the bathtub rug that might contain the criminal's DNA. This information emerged when new police took over the case. They reviewed all the documents and paid special attention to this rug. However, the police could not find it. Julia's mother allowed them to search among Julia's belongings, which she had taken from Julia's room and stored in a storage room, but the rug was not among them. Its disappearance is a mystery. Only Julia's family had access to the storage facility. Julia's grandfather suspected that her mother and stepfather had thrown the rug away while cleaning the bathroom, along with the trash. The stepfather's mother and Julia's twin sister both insist that there was no argument in their home a few days before Julia's murder. They described the gathering as warm and friendly, with no disagreements. The James is determined to seek justice for Julia. He has thoroughly researched DNA and discovered that technology has made significant advancements in the past decade, allowing for the analysis of damaged or weak DNA samples. He is puzzled by the police's disregard for his requests and suggestions, as they appear reluctant to pursue the case. Julia's mother, Kim, has divorced Jim, but they remain on good terms and maintain communication. She continues to support Jim's innocence and views him as the decent person. As a result, there have been no arrests in the case, and the perpetrator remains unpunished. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Solomon family. Angela grew up in a religious family in Nashville, USA. She was talented in singing and excelled academically. Then, she earned a doctorate in pharmacy and was successful in her career, which allowed her to earn a good income. She bought a house and lived a fulfilling life. In 2001, she reconnected with Aaron Solomon, a charismatic guy she had known since school. He was a sports presenter on a TV channel and made a good impression on her. The couple started dating, and just a few months later, Angela became pregnant with a son. In 2002, their first child was born, named Grant. Immediately after that, Aaron proposed to Angela, but their relationship was complicated, and she was unsure about marriage. She initially planned to raise the child on her own. However, her religious family pressured her to marry, and she eventually agreed. Aaron turned out to be a caring father and loving husband, and their relationship improved. For years after their wedding, in October 2006, they welcomed a daughter named Gracie. Grant, who was 4 years old at the time, was thrilled to have a younger sister. He stayed by her crib and helped his mother with her care. Then, he began playing baseball and became a successful player on his school team, gaining popularity among his peers. After the birth of Gracie, the parents' relationship worsened. Aaron was a controlling and possessive man who insulted his wife and children while having multiple affairs. He used his status as a presenter to start many affairs. In 2013, 7 years old, Gracie told her mother that her father was bothering her during bath time. It was discovered that Aaron had prohibited his wife from bathing their daughter, insisting on doing it himself, and even filmed his daughter without clothes. Angela forbade Aaron from bathing or touching their daughter. Although he admitted to his actions, he threatened Angela, warning that he would take their children away if Angela told anyone. As an active church member, he demanded complete obedience from his family, so Angela felt compelled to remain silent. Angela finds out that Aaron has cheated on many other girls and learned he was molesting minors. In 2014, explicit photos of minors were found on his phone, but the incident was covered up and he lost his job. However, then he found a new job as a financial consultant at a large bank. The couple began to argue more often. Angela wanted a divorce, but Aaron refused and suggested they see a family psychologist. Angela agreed, and during therapy, it was revealed that she had been dealing with victim syndrome throughout her life. Her parents had been harsh, imposing their religious beliefs on her, and she had entered an unfortunate marriage with Aaron, who was narcissistic and struggled with sexual addiction. The sessions didn't help with their family problems. Angela found another psychologist she trusted and shared all the details of her life and family issues. She started considering a plan to leave Aaron, who was controlling and wouldn't let her go. She kept notes on her phone and communicated with the psychologist via email. However, Aaron was secretly listening to her therapy sessions, checking her phone and email, and was aware of all her plans. She complained to her parents about Aaron's troubling behavior, but they didn't support her. They sided with he, believing, due to their faith, that a woman should endure her husband's behavior and keep the household intact. She felt unsupported by everyone. Aaron's behavior deteriorated, and he started to become violent towards his wife and children. The children, wanting to protect their mother, they began sleeping in the same room out of fear of their father. One day, Aaron attacked Angela in the bathroom, attempting to strangle her with a hairdryer cord. She was ready to say goodbye to life when her 11-year-old son, Grant, intervened and managed to stop his father. Terrified, she and the children chose not to tell anyone about the incident and did not report Aaron to the police. However, he called 911, falsely claiming that she had tried to end your life using the cord. She was then hospitalized for psychiatric evaluation, despite asserting that she was mentally sound. Eventually, doctors reassured her that she was indeed healthy. Angela's psychotherapist learned about her situation and shared their correspondence, explaining that Angela was a victim of domestic violence. Angela was discharged from the hospital on May 11, 2013, and was advised to obtain a restraining order against her husband. Medical records confirmed she was not depressed, had no end-your-life thoughts, no history of mental health issues. However, she was indeed a victim of domestic violence and was in a dangerous situation. After her release, Angela was determined to secure a restraining order against her husband and file for divorce. Upon returning home, she found the house empty. She attempted to contact Aaron, but he did not respond. She also tried calling her own parents and his parents, but received no answer. Her relatives dismissed her as mentally ill and ignored her. The next day, May 12, was Mother's Day. Angela hoped Aaron would bring the children to visit her, but instead, the police arrived at her house. He had falsely reported to 911 that she was attempting to end your life. The police checked on her, but they found no cause for concern and left. Time passed, and Angela received a restraining order but still did not know where the children were. She contacted the police several times, asking them to locate the children, but they refused to take her statement because the children were with their father, Darren, who had the legal right to have them. He had not kidnapped them. She soon discovered that he had filed for divorce first and had obtained a restraining order against her. He claimed she was a danger to him and the children. Divorce proceedings began, and both his parents and her parents spoke against her. As a result, he was granted full custody of the children, and the court ordered she to pay child support. The children were not present in court and were not asked with whom they wanted to stay. The judge noted that she had been in a mental hospital, which was enough to deny her custody claims. She couldn't do anything about her children. Angela continued to live with her father and fought hard to challenge the guardianship, arguing that the children were not well with Aaron. A retrial for the guardianship case was scheduled. He hired top lawyers for the case, having recently received a large inheritance from a wealthy aunt who had passed away. During the trial, Angela's relatives once again testified against her, alleging she was intent to end her life. However, this time, psychotherapists and staff from the psychiatric hospital defended her. They confidently stated that she was a victim of Aaron's abusive behavior and had never attempted to end her life. Her injuries were inflicted by her husband. Despite this, the judge ignored their testimony and awarded full custody to Aaron. Angela did not give up and repeatedly challenged the custody decision, eventually securing the right to see her children for 2 hours a week. When she finally saw them, she was shocked by their condition. Both Grant and Gracie had lost weight, and Gracie had severe bruises under her eyes. Aaron disciplined them harshly, using physical violence, enforcing a strict diet, and banning unhealthy and sweet foods. Grant once jumped out of a moving car to escape from his father and was injured. The children were told by their father that their mother, Angela, was dead when she was actually placed in a mental hospital. He also said it was unsafe there, so they needed to move. The children believed their father at the time because they saw their mother in a bad state after being strangled and felt hopeless, thinking no one could help them. Angela fought to gain full custody of the children, which required her to undergo a psychiatric examination to prove her mental health. She passed the examination successfully. In 2014, the court increased Angela's child visitation rights to 6 hours per week, but kept the children with their father. She continued her legal battle. In early 2015, Angela received devastating news. Aaron had been raping 9-year-old Gracie for several months. The frightened girl felt she couldn't tell anyone. She described feeling sleepy and falling asleep after eating. Then she wake up in her father's bed with severe pain in her crotch and bruises on her thighs. She didn't know how the bruises got there. Her father, Aaron, claimed it was a rash from her bathing suit, but she knew that wasn't true. He never took them to the doctor, fearing exposure, even when they were very sick. Gracie recounted how Aaron beat them, drove recklessly to scare them, and neglected their basic needs. Angela was horrified by this information and tried to use it to gain custody of the children from Aaron, their abusive father, awaiting a new trial. In April 2015, Aaron filed a complaint against Angela for not paying child support, leading to her arrest. She argued that Aaron was not properly caring for the children and was using the child support money for himself and his lovers, despite having inherited wealth. Angela was later released and continued to pay child support. She fought for her children for several more years, reporting Aaron to law enforcement, contacting his church, and warning the church school about the danger he posed. However, no one took her seriously, and everyone thought she was crazy. In 2018, Grant and Gracie ran away from home. Aaron immediately contacted the police, and the children were found quickly. When they returned, Aaron punished them harshly. Angela, upon discovering this, requested an emergency custody hearing due to Aaron's abusive behavior. On August 17, 2018, during Grant's baseball tournament, Aaron and Gracie came to watch the match. After the match, Aaron took Gracie with him, while Grant stayed at the sports camp. Aaron rented a hotel room with only one bed for the night. Despite 12-year-old Gracie's request for a room with 2 beds, Aaron raped her that night. The following day, on August 18, an emergency custody hearing took place. Gracie disclosed what her father had done, but Aaron's lawyer denied the allegations, suggesting that Gracie imagined the incident and arguing that Aaron, being a loving father, couldn't have committed such an act. Later, Grant testified that his father was abusive, beat him, fed him poorly, humiliated him, and forced him to train all day. Both children expressed their desire to live with their mother, not their father. However, the judge did not believe them. He concluded that Angela and the children were lying to damage Aaron's reputation because Aaron attended the same Grace Church as the judge and a senator, where he was well regarded. This was a closed, deeply religious community. Aaron attended church every Sunday, never missing an event, and was well regarded by the community's elite. People couldn't believe that Aaron was capable of such monstrous behavior. and there is no evidence that he abused the children. The judge dismissed Angela's request for custody. During the trial, Gracie clung to her mother and was reluctant to leave with her father. However, when her father threatened to call the police, she had no choice but to go with him. The mother lost custody rights, but the children were unable to stay with their father either. Gracie and Grant sought help from school staff, a psychologist, and the church, sharing the terrible things their father had done to them. However, the principal called them in and urged them to remain silent to protect both their and their father's reputations. Despite their efforts to explain why they didn't want to return home, the principal dismissed their claims, saying he had heard it all before and didn't believe them. He contacted their father, who then removed them from school. Nobody believed the children, as everyone thought Angela had coerced them into falsely accusing their father. One day, Gracie and Grant couldn't take it anymore and ran to their mother. Angela. Then, Aaron came to look for them and asked them to return. Grant and Gracie refused, and he allowed them to live temporarily with their mother. With the help of therapy, they set boundaries, and their father began to respect them. Grant and Gracie sometimes had to live with their father, as he still had more custody rights, but most of the time they lived with their mother. During those times, they were happy, and the relationship with their father became more tense and reached its peak. On July 20th, 2020, 18-year-old Grant was driving to his training, which was about an hour away from Angela's house. Upon arriving at the parking lot, a tragic accident occurred in which Grant lost his life. His father, Aaron, who was also at the training, witnessed the incident. He immediately called 911 for help for his son. Aaron later recounted the event. Aaron explained that he had exited his pickup truck to retrieve his gear from the back. While standing in the parking lot near the building, he was focused on his phone and did not notice the pickup rolling backwards. The vehicle hit him, dragging him several meters before it went down a deep ditch. Aaron, who was there with 3 others, saw everything unfold. When the police arrived, they found Grant lying on his back beneath the front of a car, but the tires were not touching him. Blood was streaming from his nose and ears. Using a jack, they managed to lift the car and pulled him out. He was still breathing, so they performed CPR and rushed him to the hospital. Unfortunately, despite their efforts, Grant, who was in serious condition, died on the way without regaining consciousness. Although he had multiple injuries, but the official cause of death was cardiac arrest. Strangely, Aaron accompanied him to the hospital and signed papers preventing an autopsy and organ donation. When Angela learned about the incident, she hurried to the hospital and requested an autopsy, but her pleas were ignored. The police classified the case as an accident and didn't pursue further investigation. Angela believed Aaron's account of the incident was false, pointing to various inconsistencies. Grant's injuries didn't match those of someone trapped under a car. He had no typical crushing injuries. The hospital recorded just 1 head injury and 3 bruises, on his jaw, left hip, and right hip. Aaron claimed Grant drove a pickup for about an hour to reach his training, yet there were no burn marks from a hot car, nor were there abrasions from being dragged on asphalt. At the scene of the tragedy, there was no blood, and Grant's shoes were completely clean, which contradicted Aaron's story. The grass near the car's exit and the path where the body was dragged were untouched. There weren't even tire tracks where they should have been. Instead, they were found on the other side of the sidewalk. Grant's glasses were discovered there too. He always wore his glasses because he had poor vision without them, shown in all his photos. So, how did his glasses end up on the sidewalk if he wasn't there? He was in the parking lot. Why didn't his glasses fall there when the car allegedly ran over him? According to Aaron, Grant had his back to the car and didn't see it coming when it moved in reverse. Strangely, Grant was found lying on his back under the car but in the opposite direction. How could his body have turned 180 degrees under the car? It seems impossible. Furthermore, how could the car back into the ditch and then get back up and out of the ditch? It was hard to believe. None of the people in the nearby buildings heard Grant's screams, which should have been heard during such an accident. Everything happened quietly, so no one saw or heard anything. There were no CCTV cameras, and the three guys Aaron mentioned on the call were not there either. Strangely, Aaron did not attempt to rescue his son from the car, even though Aaron was briefly with him. Aaron just watched as his son died. Grant never stored equipment in the back of the car, he always left his uniform on the back seat. The phone Aaron claimed Grant was using was never found. Although Grant always carried his phone with him and called his girlfriend every morning, he didn't call that day for some reason. There was no damage to the car. Even though the rear bumper of this car model is fragile and prone to breaking, it was intact. It would have been damaged in such a descent. There were no witnesses to this tragic accident. A man saw Aaron walking along the road shortly before the tragedy, in the parking lot. It's unclear what he was doing there, although Aaron claimed he arrived later. At his son's funeral, Aaron described his death as a divine act, leaving everyone surprised. People were shocked by Aaron's lack of emotion, he showed no grief for his son. Angela suspected that he may have hit their son with his car elsewhere and staged the accident by bringing their son to the location afterwards. There was confusion as to why the pickup truck unexpectedly rolled away, as it had been parked correctly and had no previous issues. It was speculated that the truck might have had a technical fault, and although Aaron initially suggested investigating it to sue the manufacturer for compensation, he eventually declined, which was out of character for him since he usually pursued financial gains. He continued to drive the truck without any concern for several months. Angela wanted to investigate the truck herself, but Aaron strongly opposed the idea and promptly sent the vehicle to the scrapyard. This was puzzling, as the truck was in excellent condition and could have been sold for a good price. Angela managed to locate the vehicle in spring 2021 and arranged for an independent examination. Experts concluded that the accident could not have occurred as Aaron had claimed. Angela then pushed for the investigation of the case, which had been closed, to be reopened. Grant had just turned 18, according to Angela, and he had always protected Gracie's from their abusive father. He warned his father that as soon as he turned 18, he would go to court. He and his sister Gracie planned to formally free themselves from their father's control, believing the court would take them more seriously as adults. In Angela's opinion, Aaron feared this and decided to stop his son. Gracie was devastated by the loss of her beloved brother, who could protect her. On May 12, 2021, Gracie, then 14, uploaded an 18-minute video on YouTube in which she described her father, Aaron, as a monster. She claimed that he attempted to kill their mother, raped her, and physically abused both her and Grant, eventually killing Grant's. Gracie fears that her father might harm her now that her brother is gone. They are defenseless, and their father started harassing them. Despite a restraining order, Aaron continued to stalk she and begged her to return home, but she refused. She was granted legal protection, but her father ignored it and kept following her from school. Due to the school principal's friendship with he from church, they refused to enforce the restraining order. After this interview, Aaron once again complained that Gracie was being negatively influenced and turned against him. He persuaded she that she imagined everything and that her mother had suggested the idea of rape. Aaron filed a defamation lawsuit against Angela, gathering people who refuted the information in the video Gracie recorded. He claimed Angela demanded he give up custody and threatened him. Angela was determined to seek justice. At the trial, Aaron withdrew the lawsuit but is considering refiling with a new legal team. Angela and her daughter Gracie are striving for justice for Grant. Gracie prefers to live with her mother and not see her father. They launched a website and gathered support from many people after Grant's death. However, the pastor, the school principal, and other individuals denied any involvement. One of Grant's classmates mentioned that she, along with Gracie, asked the school administration to intervene and protect them from Aaron, but the school dismissed their request, saying it was beyond their responsibility. In Tennessee, there is a law requiring anyone who suspects child abuse to report it to the Department of Children. However, no one reported anything in this case. After Grant's death, students were not allowed to discuss the tragedy at school. Later, the pastor left the church, causing a significant split within the congregation. Currently, Aaron has not been charged with any crimes related to Grant, and he denies all accusations against him. Aaron's supporters occasionally post on social media, accusing Gracie and Angela of lying and behaving unchristianly. Angela and Gracie live together but are afraid of Aaron. Gracie aspires to become an FBI agent to help people through investigations. The tragic story of the Solomon family leaves behind many painful and unforgettable lessons about domestic abuse and violence, as well as society's indifference to victims. Through this story, we clearly see the need to protect children and vulnerable family members from abusive acts. At the same time, the importance of support from the community and authorities is also emphasized. Let's speak up together and protect the vulnerable so that no family has to endure such pain again. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Christina Purcell. Christina Purcell, a 41-year-old veterinarian, worked at a clinic in the small town of Greer, South Carolina, which has a population of 35,000. Her colleagues all described her as an exceptional person. She was regarded as the best in her department and was highly experienced. She had a great sense of humor, which helped alleviate challenging situations at work. Her co-workers respected her, and management highly valued her talents. Christina had a young daughter, whom she co-parented with her ex-husband, John Mello, during the early years of her life. Friends and acquaintances all agreed that her daughter meant everything to her. After their daughter's birth, Christina and John separated but maintained joint custody. Then, she was engaged to a new partner named Bradley. Despite an apparently perfect life, but she was involved in a custody battle with her ex-husband, John, and the custody dispute between them was intense. On October 5, 2021, when their daughter visited her father, John, he flew her to Italy. This prompted Christina to file a complaint against him for violating custody, which further strained their relationship. Christina even launched a GoFundMe campaign to raise money for her legal expenses, and many people contributed. On October 13, 2021, Bradley, aged 65, tried calling Christina's in the morning. After she failed to answer, he went to her house. He knocked, and when there was no response, he entered through the back door. Inside, he discovered a horrifying scene. Her lifeless body was in the living room with rose petals scattered around. So, he immediately called 911, but it was too late to save her. Police discovered over 30 stab wounds on her body, mostly on her head, face, and neck. Although the scene was chaotic, it did not resemble a typical robbery. The police found unusual mystical objects in the house, hinting that someone unstable might have conducted a sacrificial ritual. This led investigators to consider the possibility of a ritual murder. Forensic experts determined that Christina was murdered elsewhere. Evidence of dragging was found throughout the house, and in some areas, the body was left behind and placed in various positions, possibly to take photographs of sexual acts. Later, The body was moved to the living room and covered with rose petals, with petals also strewn along the path where it was dragged. When information about the incident leaked to the press, they dubbed it the rose petal murder. At that moment, the police have not found any signs of forced entry into the house. However, Bradley, who alerted emergency services, had entered through the back door. He informed detectives that this door was always left unlocked, suggesting the intruder could have entered the same way. At the crime scene, detectives discovered clear signs of staging that complicated their investigation. They had to sort through numerous conflicting pieces of evidence to discard the irrelevant and find the right direction. Detectives have never encountered such complex and confusing murder cases before, making it difficult to determine which lead to pursue. They suspected that the murder was intentional. The perpetrator had specifically gone to Christina's house to commit it. And detectives must find out his motives and who he is. Inside the house, they found memory cards and the laptop in the living room near the body. A transparent handbag containing a powerful illegal drug was also discovered. There were small droplets of dried blood, and Christina's mobile phone lay nearby. In the hallway, a bag was found with 2 white envelopes, each containing $500 in cash. A suitcase held a firearm, a single-shot self-defense pistol, and numerous documents related to a court case involving Christina's daughter, prompting detectives to consider the possibility that her ex-husband, John Mello, was involved. Forensic experts used luminol to examine the entire house, enabling them to detect even the smallest traces of blood. They discovered hundreds of tiny blood spots in various places, highlighting the attack's brutality. Christina suffered a significant loss of blood and endured severe pain before dying. She was stabbed 31 times. The police scrutinized Christina's mobile phone for any leads. Initially, detectives focused on whether her partner, Bradley, who found her body, might be involved in the attack. To compare information, they also retrieved his mobile phone to analyze its contents. Police noticed peculiar behavior from he was highly agitated. His reaction didn't seem like that of a grieving fiancé. He was trembling, inconsistent in his statements, and wore gloves throughout his interactions with the investigators. This behavior only heightened the suspicion of law enforcement. Later, it became clear that their suspicions were justified. While investigating Christina and Bradley's devices, the police uncovered shocking details about Bradley's life, clarifying his nervous behavior. They had strong reasons to suspect that he was exploiting her daughter, Jane Doe, to create explicit content. In February and August, he recorded videos and took photographs of Jane nude in various inappropriate poses. These materials were found on the phone and laptop that were confiscated for examination. However, it is not clear whether this was done secretly or with her consent. Doubts emerged after the police discovered more disturbing information from Bradley's laptop that revealed unsettling aspects of the intimate relationship between Christina and he. The police uncovered increasingly disturbing information, including a new type of victim, animals. Numerous photographs were discovered showing individuals involved in sexual acts with animals, mainly dogs. Shockingly, Christina, one of the clinic's leading veterinarians, who occasionally took animals home for temporary care, was involved in these acts. According to state law, such sexual offenses can result in up to 5 years in prison, and the offender must pay a fine of at least $500, which may be increased at the court's discretion. Law enforcement described these recordings as some of the most repulsive materials they had ever encountered. The public was outraged upon learning that Christina, a seemingly kind woman from a veterinary clinic, was involved in such acts with her daughter and dogs. After discovering all this evidence, Bradley Post was arrested on October 19, 2021. He was charged with the sexual exploitation of a minor and the distribution of explicit materials. It emerged that he not only created photos and videos but also sold them. Additionally, the police considered the possibility of his involvement of Christina's death, but he firmly denied any involvement. Detectives found no evidence linking him to the murder. There was no trace of blood on his body or clothes. Furthermore, Christina had died several hours before he arrived at the house, leading the police to doubt his connection to the murder. Christina's ex-husband, John Mello, is also a suspect in the case. His main motive was gaining full custody of their daughter, which he did not want to share with Christina. This is a common motive for murder. However, at the time of the crime, John was in Italy with his daughter. This alibi was easy to verify since he hadn't returned to the country. Despite this, investigators kept John on their list of suspects, considering he might have orchestrated the crime indirectly. John returned to the country on October 21, 2021, a week after Christina's murder. Following his return, the police obtained a warrant for his detention. He sought help from his best friend, Zachary Hughes, who was 29 years old at the time. Zachary seemed suspicious to the police, so they looked deeper into his background. He was born and raised in Morro Bay, California. The turning point for him came in 2005 when his parents vacationed in Virginia. During this trip, they adopted 5 children from Russia. These children had suffered abuse in their previous foster families, resulting in physical and psychological trauma. The adoption aimed to teach Zachary and his brother Ellie about morality and to provide the adopted children with a safe, loving, and stable home. Zachary and Ellie struggled to communicate with their new siblings, leading to frequent family conflicts due to misunderstandings. Zachary's entire family worked on the farm, but he had a special talent: he studied music. His parents bought him a piano, and he became very skilled at playing it, which was especially noticeable in high school. He started participating in music competitions and won first place at the Southeastern Piano Festival. He has achieved great success, even performing a solo program with the South Carolina Philharmonic Orchestra. In 2010, he applied to the Juilliard School in New York, where Irina taught piano at an advanced level. Not only was Zachary accepted, but he was also offered several scholarships for his exceptional talent. Thanks to his exceptional talent, Zachary outperformed all his classmates and became the only student from the USA selected to participate in the International Music Festival in Kyoto. Only 11 people from around the world were chosen for this event. Those who know he say he is a loyal friend, highly moral and very good at communication. In his free time, he used his skills to help those in need, often performing for free at rehabilitation centers, nursing homes, and hospitals to bring joy to people. By 2018, Zachary enrolled in a master's program in piano performance at the university. At that time, he had a strong desire to help people globally. This led him to volunteer for the United States Marine Corps and apply to a military educational institution to become an officer within a year. He understood the intricacies of military service, but at the start of his second year, he suffered fractures in both legs. This injury forced him to halt his studies and receive the title of Hello. Around this time, a woman reached out to Zachary, seeking a talented pianist for a church in Greer, South Carolina. He accepted the offer and moved there to perform regularly. And he received half of the donations collected from churchgoers. Initially, this provided a good income, but by the mid-2020s, the pandemic significantly reduced the number of church attendees. As a result, he had to find new income sources. He began giving solo performances throughout the city and state and took on additional part-time jobs. Additionally, he started a blog offering valuable piano lessons. To support his performances, he acquired portable electrical equipment, which provided him with the necessary mobility. While living and working in South Carolina, Zachary met John, Christina's ex-husband and a former music producer. John supported Zachary by helping him with performances and offers him a part-time job. Between mid-2020 and 2021, when he assisted John with household chores, which deepened their friendship. He became John's closest friend. As a result, the police questioned him about his possible involvement in Christina's murder, wondering if John could have asked him to do such a thing. Meanwhile, investigators reviewed CCTV footage from a camera located near Christina's house. A camera installed in the peephole of the house opposite captured all the incident outside Christina's home on the day of her murder. The footage showed a stranger wearing dark clothing and a hooded jacket entering her house around 10 a.m. A few hours after, the stranger left on a bicycle, this time wearing a mask. Christina did not leave the house, and no one else visited until the next day, when Bradley arrived and found her dead. This evidence cleared Bradley from the list of suspects in the murder case, although he remained in jail on other charges. Investigators suspected that a stranger in dark clothing, captured on camera, was the killer, but they couldn't identify him. His face was covered, and there were no distinguishing features on his body. They then requested footage from surveillance cameras along the bicycle paths to trace his movements and began reviewing the recordings. This process was lengthy but fruitful. The bicycle appeared in several videos, including one where the stranger in black was loading it into the back of his pickup truck. Although the grainy footage obscured the license plate, the model, make, and color of the truck matched Zachary's vehicle. It seemed he was involved in the brutal murder of Christina's. The police obtained a warrant to search Zachary's house. There, they found a bicycle identical to the one used by the attacker. They seized Zachary's computer for examination. Through this, they discovered active correspondence between John and Zachary, uncovering over 1,700 text messages, most of which were encrypted. The messages were clearly coded and contained hidden information. Additionally, some texts were jumbled. They probably did this to distract the police if the police suddenly contacted them. Detectives found the following clues in the messages. On April 17, 2021, 6 months before Christina's death, John asked to host a party for her. This message was not encrypted. On the day of the murder, John asked a friend how the musical performance went, and the friend replied that everything was great. Although it seemed like a harmless question, the police discovered there was no performance that day. They suspected that John used performance as a code word for the murder of Christina. All other information on Zachary's phone was either encrypted or deleted. He also used an access code unknown to the police, which complicated and delayed their investigation. Additionally, they couldn't obtain data on the device's location at the time of the attack on Christina. The phone was frequently switched to flight mode, including when the mysterious masked man came to Christina's house. It appears this was done on purpose to prevent Zachary from being tracked and to avoid involvement in the crime scene. Based on the evidence collected, officers obtained a warrant for Zachary's arrest. While they were preparing to file charges, Zachary was invited to perform on an international cruise. By the time the warrant was issued, he was already in Europe, so the detectives had to wait. Fortunately, when the charges were filed, Zachary had returned to Michigan, unaware that they were planning to arrest him. He could have easily left the country by crossing into Canada or taking another flight to a cruise ship. However, once he learned about the charges, he voluntarily returned to South Carolina and surrendered to the police, believing they were mistaken. On November 3, 2021, Zachary hired lawyers to defend his reputation, stating he was not guilty of any wrongdoing and intended to refute the slander tarnishing his name. However, he refused to allow the police access to his phone, prompting them to file a court petition. The court subsequently ordered full access to the mobile phone. Despite this, he repeatedly provided incorrect passwords, which delayed the investigation. Finally, by April 8, 2023, after approximately 700,000 attempts, the smartphone was unlocked. The police discovered crucial messages between John and he discussing their encrypted plans to kill Christina. While these messages were intended to be used as trial evidence, they were considered circumstantial and insufficient to determine the trial's outcome. Zachary and John were known for their impeccable reputation, supported by many witnesses, and had no prior criminal history. The jury could not rely solely on correspondence and footage of a similar car to convict them. More new evidence emerged when a forensic examination uncovered the criminal's DNA under Christina's fingernails, which matched Zachary's DNA. Consequently, the police could confidently assert that he was the one who attacked and brutally killed Christina in her home. The defense argued that the CCTV footage did not clearly show the criminal's face or accurately identify the car involved. As a result, they labeled the evidence as circumstantial, as initially assumed. They emphasized that Zachary had no prior legal issues and was described by friends and acquaintances as a kind person incapable of committing a violent crime. Additionally, there was no apparent motive for him to attack Christina. And the lawyers rejected the DNA test results, claiming the samples were tampered with or contaminated. From the outset of the trial, once the public became aware that Zachary, the renowned musician, might face imprisonment, the court received numerous letters from dissatisfied people. These letters came from former classmates, teachers, Zachary's friends, and even people who didn't personally know him but admired his musical talent. Among the supporters were also numerous employers who praised his skills. Collectively, they vouched for his character, adamantly believing that someone as talented and kind-hearted could not be a murderer. In total, the court received over 50 such letters. The lawyers emphasized that Zachary had no previous legal issues. He had served in the U.S. Army, having volunteered and pursued education to become an officer rather than just serving as a private soldier. Additionally, Zachary could have avoided any legal troubles by simply accepting an invitation to return to work on a cruise liner. However, he chose to return to his home state and turn himself into the police as soon as he learned about the charges against him. He was fully aware of everything, including the warrants that the police were obtaining to investigate further. Despite this, he wasn't deterred because he believed he was innocent. The lawyers presented this as key evidence of his innocence. Zachary requested to be released on a $100,000 bail so he could be placed under house arrest with his parents until the trial, allowing him to stay in a calm environment where he could play his favorite instrument. He also agreed to have no contact with the families involved in the case. However, the court denied his bail request, leading to his transfer to prison. He remains there, awaiting trial set for 2024. He continues to deny any involvement in Christina's death. John also denies all charges. During a conversation with investigators, he explained that he fled to Italy with his daughter. He said he was exhausted from legal battles with his Christina and was horrified to discover that her fiancé, Bradley, had inappropriate intentions towards his 9-year-old daughter. Evidence suggested Christina was involved, as she appeared in some photos with her daughter. So John claims he took his daughter away to protect her from Christina, her unstable mother. He intended to challenge for custody using the explicit photos taken by Bradley and believed he had a strong case. If Christina lost custody, John would have no motive to harm her. Nevertheless, John repeatedly insisted he would fight for his daughter at any cost, despite he not commenting on his connection to Zachary. The prosecution believes Zachary is involved because his DNA was found under Christina's fingernails, indicating she resisted him. He may be either a co-conspirator or a victim of John's manipulation. The investigation into Christina Purcell's death has become intricate, full of unexpected developments and mysteries. Detectives persist in seeking justice for her, gradually assembling clues to identify the mastermind and uncover the case's dark secrets. Although the journey to bring justice to she may be long, but it will certainly not stop. The investigation team hopes that the case will soon be illuminated, allowing she to rest in peace. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Jennifer Wirtz. After Rebecca and her husband divorced, she and her daughter, Jennifer, moved to the Somerset Tower residential area. She purchased an apartment in a 7-story building in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. Jennifer felt that her mother was having a hard time during this period, and she thought that it had something to do with her parents' divorce. However, Rebecca's loneliness didn't last long. She soon met Charles, a worker at the complex, and they began a romantic relationship. Charles was an eccentric and cheerful man who often joked around. Before long, Charles moved in with Rebecca. Initially, she felt this was a positive change after the emotional hardships of her divorce. She appeared to enjoy her new relationship. However, Charles's behavior soon became concerning. His mood swings were drastic. He could go from laughing hysterically to becoming angry. He started to seem unpredictable and strange. Charles worked on weekends, and during this time, Jennifer saw the true nature of he. Charles began harassing her and quickly progressed to sexual violence. At just 7 years old, Jennifer realized that something terrible was happening. Little girl mustered the courage to tell her mother, Rebecca, about it. However, Rebecca didn't believe her daughter. Rebecca dismissed her claims, telling her that she was imagining things, which caused she to resent her mother. Rebecca never took any action against Charles, not even to investigate her daughter's allegations. As a result, the abuse continued regularly. Jennifer felt so miserable that she didn't want to go home after school because her mother was not supportive. This situation persisted for 3 years. On February 26, 1991, police contacted Rebecca to ask for information about her missing neighbor, Dee Rosenthal. Detectives interviewed everyone in the area to gather information about Dee. That same day, they also questioned a local rapist named Charles. He surprised them by claiming he did not know Dee, despite the fact that they had been neighbors for a long time. As an employee of the complex, he should have seen her regularly at work. Dee Rosenthal, 32, is a therapist who specializes in supporting children with autism. Her colleagues, patients, neighbors, and family all spoke highly of her, indicating that no one would wish her harm. Dee had moved from Canada to the United States less than a year before her disappearance. Witnesses reported seeing her for the last time on February 22, and since then, there had been no leads. Investigators spoke not only with neighbors but also with Dee's family. Her brother, Blaine, mentioned that Dee had aspirations of attending the Alvin Institute in Philadelphia, a dream she had since college, which motivated her move to the U.S. The Alvin Institute is a specialized clinic designed to help children with autism. Blaine expressed disapproval of Dee's decision to move to the United States, feeling that it was a harsh place and very different from Canada and their familiar traditions. He admitted to the police that he tried his best to prevent her from leaving for a foreign country, but she was very determined, took everything for granted, and believed she would be able to return home soon. Witnesses reported seeing a woman who resembled Dee, but identified her as Lori. Unfortunately, Dee's leads did not yield any results. Ultimately, his hopes were not realized, and Dee vanished without a trace. At the beginning of the investigation, the police focused on 2 suspects, both of whom worked at the apartment complex where Dee disappeared. The first suspect was Steve Gomez, Dee's boyfriend. The second was Charles Reddish, the man known locally as Crazy Charles. Both men appeared suspicious, but the police lacked concrete evidence against them. Despite this, they remained on the investigators' radar. Charles claimed he spent the entire day on February 22nd with his mother and a young girl named Jennifer. Little girl confirmed his alibi, stating he was with her the whole time. The police could not find any evidence to charge Charles. However, some detectives noticed Jennifer's fear when they mentioned him. This caught the attention of investigators, but they could not take any action against Charles without further evidence or testimony. The Wirtz family experienced several years of suffering and humiliation after a mysterious incident, which ultimately led them to move out of the apartment complex. While this may make people suspicious, the act actually stems from anxiety about the possibility of a crime happening around them. Many residents chose to leave for their safety because rumors of Dee Dee's disappearance had spread quickly. People were eager to distance themselves from the possibility of living near a potential criminal. Meanwhile, detectives continued their investigation. As they gathered more information, they encountered increasingly conflicting clues. Forensic experts examined the home of Dee Dee, but found it completely empty. The apartment was clean and tidy, with no signs of forced entry or a struggle. However, the front door was unlocked, which was unusual for a missing person case. Despite their efforts, forensic experts found no evidence of blood. It appeared as if Dee Dee had calmly left her apartment, as her belongings were untouched and her car was still parked outside. The only clue investigators discovered was an $80 check hidden in a diary, but there was no cash in her purse or wallet. All clues pointed to Dee Dee having left her home voluntarily. Investigators learned that she had financial difficulties, often spending more than she earned and have a lot of debt, but these problems do not appear to be serious enough to involve kidnapping or murder. However, it raised the question, did Dee Dee leave to escape her creditors? After interviewing all of Dee Dee's neighbors, detectives uncovered a concerning claim from one elderly woman. She reported that on February 22nd, around 4 a.m., she was awakened by a loud thud from the ceiling, which she later realized was caused by Dee Dee, her upstairs neighbor. The sound startled her, but after a brief silence, she assumed it was just something that had fallen and returned to sleep. Meanwhile, all the other residents provided no useful information, leaving the investigation at a standstill. Dee Dee's sudden disappearance captured public attention, and the media began extensively covering the story. However, due to a lack of evidence, the case remained unresolved for years. The Wirtz family later moved into a new home north of Cherry Hill. Rebecca and Jennifer felt so sad for Dee Dee, but they never knew what happened to her. Over time, they, like others, gradually forgot about Dee Dee, including the police, who suggested she might have returned to Canada. Dee Dee's brother Blaine is not satisfied with this explanation and continues to search for her. Unlike everyone else, he is the only one who doesn't give up. He's frustrated by law enforcement's inability to provide answers or locate Dee Dee. He spent years visiting local bars, restaurants, and neighbors' apartments around Hill 67, interviewing anyone who might have information. Eventually, Blaine admits that his relentless search has become a kind of obsession, causing him to lose almost everything, including his family. One day, upon returning home from another search, his wife told him she wanted to break up, marking the end of their relationship. Life was challenging for the Wirtz family after they moved to a new home. They understood why Charles was called crazy. He often acted inappropriately and hurled insults at Rebecca and Jennifer. His aggression was escalating, and although Jennifer never witnessed he physically harm her mother, Rebecca, but little girls suspected that her mother was also suffering from his abusive behavior. However, they stayed together and Rebecca endured the troubles of the relationship. For years, Jennifer suffered from the pain of his abuse, and little girl knew her mother was enduring the same. Despite everything, Rebecca was not ready to leave him. Jennifer spent a lot of time trying to convince her mother, Rebecca, to leave Charles. Eventually, little girl succeeded in persuading her mother that their toxic relationship needed to end. They planned an escape and decided to move in with Jennifer's grandmother, a place Charles had never visited, which would keep them hidden. Jennifer was thrilled with this plan. Little girl looked forward to being free from Charles, the man who had tormented her for so long. It seemed like they were on the verge of freedom. However, Rebecca made a critical mistake by inadvertently revealing their plans to Charles. It was Jennifer's last day at school. Following Rebecca's request, little girl had secretly packed her belongings in advance and hidden them. According to their plan, Rebecca was supposed to pick her up after school around 6 p.m., right after she finished playing field hockey with her friends. When she went to the parking lot, she was surprised to see not her mother driving, but Charles, and her mother sitting in the passenger seat. Angered, she yelled at her mother, feeling frustrated that her mother never kept her promises. In response, Rebecca simply told she to get in the car and calm down. Inside the car, an eerie silence fell. Jennifer felt a sense of foreboding throughout the journey. Charles watched her intently through the rearview mirror, and she dreaded what awaited her at home. Jennifer worries that he has bad intentions to keep her and her mother by his side. When they got home, Charles seemed normal. He said he wanted to have a farewell party before they left. But Jennifer didn't buy it. Her fears were confirmed when they entered the house and found no dinner prepared. Confused, little girl asked about it, but he stammered a vague explanation, then abruptly stating he needed the car keys to buy groceries and rushed out. Desperate, Jennifer urged Rebecca to seize the moment and escape before Charles returned, sensing something was off. However, Rebecca dismissed her concerns and told her to wait for he to return. He has a surprise for them. Frustrated, Jennifer retreated to her room, lay down on her bed, and eventually fell asleep. In the middle of the night, Jennifer was jolted awake by a loud noise around 2 a.m. Alarmed, she couldn't ignore it any longer. She got up and began to descend the stairs, the noise growing louder. When she reached the doorway, she realized something terrible was happening. The sounds were like violent blows, and little girl felt helpless, not knowing how long this horrifying scene would continue. Rebecca was lying on the floor, while her attacker, Charles, leaned over her, striking her repeatedly. Suddenly, he turned around and saw Jennifer. He grabbed the little girl by her hair and dragged her into the living room, where the violence was happening. As he pulled she past Rebecca, she saw something horrifying. Her mother's face was so badly injured that she could hardly recognize her. Rebecca, 43 years old, had a shattered jaw and a broken arm, and she showed no signs of life. To Jennifer, it looked like her mother was dead. Desperate, Jennifer pleaded with Charles not to harm them and to let them go. But he threw her into a chair in the living room, positioning her directly in front of Rebecca. Then, he picked up a small axe from the floor and slowly approached Rebecca. Panicking, little girl screamed for him to stop. She could hear her mother's labored breathing and realized her mother was still alive. But soon, there were more blows, and he attacking her mother. He was literally chopping into Rebecca with the axe. The smell of blood filled the air. Then, he pulled the sheet off Jennifer and dragged her upstairs to the bedroom. There, he tortured and raped her for 2 to 3 hours. Little girl was powerless to resist and simply prayed for it all to end. After Charles finished his torment, he sat next to Jennifer on the bed. She was badly injured and covered in blood, but she was still alive. Then, he asked her to kill him. Jennifer replied that she couldn't do that. He suddenly declared that he would kill her and then end his life, as he didn't want to end up in prison. Terrified, Jennifer didn't want to take a life, even one as evil as Charles's. Although she felt helpless, she remembered methods she had seen in crime shows about negotiating with hostage takers, and she decided to apply them. little girl focused on listening calmly to he. She aimed to show empathy, hoping to soothe him, and gradually convinced him not only to spare her life but also to reconsider taking his own. Jennifer advised Charles that it would be a good idea if he told the police the truth, saying that he had lost control and was acting erratically. Besides, he could also negotiate with the prosecutor to get a reduced sentence. However, he, feeling uncertain, began pacing back and forth in the bedroom, holding a bloody axe. For the first time, he understood the severity of what he had done. Little girl managed to persuade he to surrender to the police, and then she called 911 for help. She was clearly in shock and found it difficult to express one's thoughts. Charles even assisted Jennifer's in getting up, dressing, and walking to the porch. The dispatcher informed them that the police were on their way, and they just had to wait. It's difficult to imagine what Jennifer was feeling during this time. She knew that he was unpredictable and could harm them at any moment. Despite this, little girl waited calmly for the police to arrive. Then, they quickly separated she from Charles. One of the detectives investigating Charles recalled his unusual reaction when asked about Rebecca's location. He vaguely stated she was inside the house and, when asked if she needed an ambulance, he claimed she can no longer be helped. Despite his assertion, it was clear that help was urgently required. A detective from the Cherry Hill Police Department arrived at the scene. This was the same officer who had investigated Dee Dee's disappearance 4 years ago. He remembered a repairman named Charles, who had caught his attention back then, and now he decided to question Charles's again. The police, along with Charles, entered the house equipped with a tape recorder to document the incident. They aimed to piece together the horrifying incidents that had taken place there. During the questioning, both the accounts of Charles and Jennifer aligned, until Jennifer disclosed the rape and torture that took place in her bedroom. Charles completely denied these allegations, he seemingly unable to accept the reality of what he had done to she. When the police mentioned the rape, he laughed, dismissing the idea of being intimate with Jennifer, a 14-year-old girl, as ridiculous. However, as the interrogation continued, he confessed to everything. Detectives from the Cherry Hill station suspect Charles has vital information about Dee Dee's case. Knowing that it was easy to get information out of Charles, they questioned him again about the disappearance of Dee Dee, who had been gone for 4 years. Their intuition was right, and he began confessing. He revealed that early one morning, he entered Dee Dee's apartment through the roof, descending onto her balcony. His intention was to rob and assault her. However, she caught him in the act. Then, in the struggle, he attacked her, raped her, and subjected her to mistreatment. He feared that she could identify him and report him to the police. To eliminate this risk, he decided to kill her. Charles explained that they fought on the bed, and during the struggle, Dee Dee fell to the floor. The loud noise of her fall was heard by a neighbor below. After that, he strangled her with a pillow and fled the scene. He had stolen $80 from her apartment, which the police found the next day. Subsequently, he returned to the scene, wrapped Dee Dee's body in a sheet, and transported it to the parking lot in a grocery cart. He also gathered her belongings and disposed of them in a nearby dumpster. After confessing to both murders, Charles led police to where he hid Dee Dee's body. But unfortunately, he couldn't recall the exact location. However, the police still believed him because he provided specific details about the crime that only the perpetrator could have known. He claimed to have taken Dee Dee to the Delaware River area, and he disposed of the body in a spot known for frequent waste dumping. During the 4 years Dee Dee's body lay there, thousands of tons of garbage accumulated, making the search extremely difficult. Despite extensive efforts, but the remains of Dee Dee were never found, and the search was eventually discontinued. Charles faced 2 trials for the murders. After the search concluded, both cases were assigned to a prosecutor from Hill. Following the initial meeting with the lawyer, Charles, apparently on the advice of his defense attorney, withdrew his earlier confessions to the murders. In any case, a confession alone is not enough to result in a conviction in the state of New Jersey. To achieve a conviction, any oral confession must be accompanied by specific and credible evidence. This means that Dee Dee's murder is unlikely to go unsolved, as the police have little evidence left other than an $80 check. 2 trials took place, one after the other, with Charles as the defendant in both cases. The first trial involved the murder of Rebecca Wirtz and the torture of her daughter, Jennifer. During the trial, Jennifer demonstrated courage and composure as a witness, providing clear and concise answers. The forensic expert testified about Rebecca's severe injuries, which included at least 25 axe blows. Due to the overwhelming evidence against Charles, the jury delivered a guilty verdict after only 40 minutes of deliberation. As a result, Charles received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. The second trial involved the death of Dee Dee Rosenthal and presented a more complex situation. Although the prosecutor aimed to achieve a harsher punishment, the difficulty lay in the lack of evidence at the crime scene, which Charles had meticulously cleaned up. Furthermore, Charles retracted his earlier confession and presented an alibi, claiming that Dee Dee had simply moved away to start a new life. This new testimony gave Charles a chance to avoid conviction. However, the prosecutor tried to prove that Dee Dee was not the type of person who would give up everything and go adventuring. She has completely devoted her love to taking care of autistic children and she cannot leave them. Her brother, Blaine, corroborated this, stating that she would have informed him if she had planned to leave. Furthermore, all of her belongings, including her documents, keys, car, and pet cat, were still in her apartment. In Charles's recorded confession, he claimed that Rebecca was the only person who knew about his involvement in Dee Dee's murder. It is unclear why Rebecca chose to keep this a secret. Perhaps she was afraid of Charles or did not believe the truth. He stated in his confession, as well as in a previous conversation with his daughter, that he was under the influence of prohibited substances during both crimes. Charles Reddish was initially charged with Dee Dee Rosenthal's murder in November 1995. 3 years later, in December 1998, he was convicted of the crimes he committed against Rebecca and Jennifer. By March 2001, he agreed to confess to Dee Dee's manslaughter as part of a plea bargain with the prosecution. The terms of the agreement required he to reveal the location of Dee Dee's body. However, at the last minute, he changed his mind and refused to comply. The prosecutor believed that he realized the extent of his crimes and was concerned about additional charges, which led to him changing his mind. Consequently, the plea bargain was withdrawn, and he went to trial again in October 2001. Charles again made false claims that Dee Dee was still alive and mentioned a missing woman named Laura. However, the jury saw through the lie, and he was sentenced to death in 2002. But in 2004, the New Jersey Supreme Court overturned the death sentence. 1 year later, it was replaced with a prison term of 30 to 60 years, which was added to his life sentence for Rebecca and Jennifer. Unfortunately, the body of Dee Dee was never recovered. After the trial, Jennifer was able to start a new life. She moved in with her cousin Shannon. She was finally able to live a peaceful life, free from the years of torture and mistreatment. She attended a Catholic school, joined a support group for young girls who had survived traumatic experiences. Her relatives provided significant support. As she grew older, Jennifer was able to come to terms with the traumatic experiences she had endured. She worked hard, built a successful career, started a family, and became a mother to 2 daughters. Blaine, Dee Dee's brother, held on to hope, despite his failure to find his missing younger sister. Blaine felt relieved to know that justice had been served, and especially that Charles was no longer causing harm to anyone because he was in custody. In tribute to Dee Dee, Blaine established a Canadian foundation in her name, focusing on supporting women who have endured physical and emotional abuse. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Neville and June Bamber. June and Neville became the owners of White House Farm. A Royal Air Force veteran, after many years of service, he transitioned to a position as the master of a small local court. In 1949, June married he at the age of 25, and that same year, they moved into their new farmhouse. Their dream is to have children and build a happy, close family. However, June could not get pregnant. After numerous attempts, they discovered that the issue was genetic, and they would not be able to have biological children. However, they did not lose hope, and they were able to find a way to become parents. The Bamber family adopted 2 children from an orphanage. First, they adopted Sheila, who was just 3 months old, and a few years later, they adopted 6-month-old Jeremy. June and Neville cared for and educated their adopted children conscientiously, giving them all their love and tenderness. As Sheila and Jeremy grew up, they ensured they received a good education by sending them to prestigious private schools with high-quality standards. The Bambers' financial situation was very good, allowing them to take care of themselves and their children fully and comfortably. Like any family, June and Neville also faced problems in their relationship. Not having a biological relationship with your children can sometimes make the situation more complicated. However, for the most part, their family life proceeded smoothly, without any major conflicts. In 1985, Sheila was 28, Jeremy was 24, and their adoptive parents, June and Neville, had just turned 60. That summer was so peaceful, with everyone enjoying the sun and nature, until the early hours of August 7th. At 3:30 a.m., Jeremy was awakened by an unexpected phone call. When he answered, he was shocked when he heard his father, Neville, on the other line. Neville's voice was frantic and distressed. He struggled to explain that Sheila had gone crazy and have weapons. While Jeremy still didn't fully understand what was going on, the call suddenly lost connection. Alarmed, Jeremy immediately contacted the police, relaying what Neville had said. He also warned them that Sheila could be dangerous. Despite the urgency, it took the police an hour and a half to arrive at the scene. By then, it was still dark, and the house was shrouded in shadows. The area was eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos Neville had described. Since firearms were reportedly involved, the police approached cautiously, adhering to standard procedures. Then, they decided not to enter the house. Instead, they waited outside, for the task force to come and handle it. The police positioned themselves at a safe distance from the house and used a megaphone to try to communicate with anyone inside. For more than 2 hours, police tried to contact Bamber's family, but received no response. During this time, the police asked Jeremy to explain what had happened at the Bamber household the previous day. He explained that the entire family had gathered for dinner the night before. Toward the end of the evening, there had been a minor misunderstanding, but not serious. He also mentioned that he had left a pistol and a .22 caliber carbine with his parents. Both guns were in good working order and loaded. Nearly 3 hours after the first police officers arrived, at approximately 8 a.m., the special forces entered the house. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy and somber. The team cautiously advanced, inspecting the first floor. When they entered the kitchen, they found a scene of chaos. A chair facing down on the ground, and next to it, in a pool of blood, was Neville's lifeless body. He had been shot 8 times, 6 of which hit the head, leaving him with little chance of survival. His hands and face were bruised and scraped, with a broken nose and jaw, shows that he fought back drastic against the attacker. The officers completed their search of the first floor, then, they moving upstairs. Each step had to be made with caution to avoid noise, but this is very difficult. Because the floor is old and makes a creaking sound every time it is moved. On the second floor, in 2 bedrooms, they discovered 4 more bodies. They found June, Sheila, and 2 6-year-old boys, Daniel and Nicholas, all of whom had been fatally shot. June had been struck by 7 bullets, while Daniel and Nicholas sustained 5 and 3 shots, respectively. Sheila was found on the threshold of her parents' bedroom, with 2 gunshot wounds under her chin. In total, 25 bullets were used to kill the 5 members of Bamber family. Initially, police theorized that the Bamber family members had been deliberately killed. But who could have committed such an act? Was the perpetrator an acquaintance of the family, who had long planned to harm them and then finally carried it out? Or was the criminal so clever that he tried to fool the police with a fake clue? These questions remained unanswered, prompting the authorities to immediately begin an investigation. It is remarkable that although Sheila and Jeremy were both very well educated, they grew up with completely different personalities. Jeremy was introverted from a young age, preferred solitude, and did poorly in elementary school. Sheila, on the other hand, always had many friends around her. Jeremy is hot-tempered and has difficulty controlling his emotions. Even though his parents tried to educate him, but he still did not change. Eventually, they decided to send him to boarding school, which happened in 1970, when he was 9 years old. Boarding schools in England at that time were famous for their strict and harsh discipline, applied to all ages of students. Attending such institutions was expensive, but this was not an issue for the Bambers. As soon as Jeremy entered the boarding school, he realized he could no longer behave as he had before, as any disobedience was met with punishment. Unfortunately, he made the mistake of telling his classmates that he had come from an orphanage. His friends used that information to bully him. They often taunted him about being adopted, calling him a bastard. His years at boarding school were a challenging period for him. Although they didn't teach him many good things, they did help him improve his character somewhat. Over time, Jeremy became calmer, went on to university, and successfully graduated. Neville was extremely proud of his son and even bought him a ticket to Australia. For the next 4 years, he traveled extensively across the country, spent time living in New Zealand, and eventually returned to England in 1982. Upon his return, his parents, Neville and June, asked him to work on their farm. Along with the job, they provided him with a place to live, a cottage 6 kilometers from the farm, along with a car and a monthly salary of nearly $1,000, a generous amount for the time. They wanted to ensure that he had a comfortable life and did everything they could to support him. Additionally, they hoped he would help them when they were old. June, a very religious woman, had a hard time accepting the fact that her children had different views and attitudes about religion. Throughout her life, she did everything to guide them toward what she believed was the true path and to bring them closer to God. Unfortunately, her efforts were unsuccessful. So, she had suffered from severe depression, and her mental health had greatly deteriorated. At the time, mental health issues were treated with a crude and outdated method, administering electric shocks to the patient. It was believed that this could positively influence brain function. June's depression wasn't caused solely by her son, Jeremy. Her daughter Sheila, despite her calmer demeanor, also caused her great distress. Sheila enjoyed looking at magazines featuring models in provocative poses. Sheila dreamed of becoming a model and appearing on the cover of such magazines. However, she does not support this. But Sheila's problems don't stop there. One day, Sheila announced to her parents that she was pregnant. In many families, the news might have been met with joy, but the Bamber family is not like that. Sheila was still a teenager and unmarried, which made the situation complicated. June, her adoptive mother, faced a difficult decision. Should she pressure Sheila to have an abortion? As a Christian, June could not condone abortion, but at the same time, allowing the child to be born is unacceptable. Then, June told Sheila to make her own choice, but on the condition that if she had an abortion, no one in the family would know. This makes the relationship between June and Sheila more and more tense. In 1977, despite her parents' objections, Sheila is married to Colin Caffell. They on to have twin sons, Nicholas and Daniel. Initially, their family life seemed happy, but Sheila began to suspect Colin of infidelity. Her suspicions were correct, and she eventually filed for divorce. In 1982, they are officially divorced, which had a devastating impact on Sheila's mental health. She couldn't bear the shock from the divorce, so she fell into depression, and she was eventually admitted to a mental hospital for treatment. Nicholas and Daniel were sent to an orphanage, where they stayed for nearly 2 years. During this time, Sheila's mental health deteriorated further. She became increasingly anxious, frequently spoke about ending her own life and that of her children, whom she believed were possessed by the devil. She was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. Meanwhile, Sheila and Jeremy seemed to swap positions with each other. Jeremy, who was a rebel for years, now lives a peaceful and stable life. In 1985, Sheila reconciled with her ex-husband, Colin. Together, they removed Nicholas and Daniel from the orphanage and start a new life together. In August, Neville and June invited Sheila and her family to visit, so they could reunite with their grandchildren, Daniel von Nicholas. They hadn't seen their 2 nephews in a long time. They decided that the family would spend a week together, after which Colin would take the boys on a trip to Norway. On Tuesday, August 6, 1985, Colin brought the boys to the family farm. And everyone gathered at the Bamber house. The day was filled with joy. There was a family dinner, a happy atmosphere, and delicious food. Later, Neville and June asked Sheila to take Daniel and Nicholas back to the orphanage, arguing that she couldn't provide them with a proper education. This suggestion angered Sheila. She replied that she would make the decision herself. The calm atmosphere of the evening was disrupted at 8:30 p.m. Around the same time, Jeremy left the house. Barbara Wilson, the secretary at Bamber Farm, called Neville regarding a work-related matter. When Neville answered, she realized he seemed very annoyed. In the background, she could hear raised voices, as though people were arguing or upset about something. This was unusual for the Bamber family, which surprised she. However, she couldn't learn more about the situation because Neville quickly ended the call and hung up. The next morning, everyone present in Bamber's house was shot dead. Jeremy, the only survivor, was informed of the tragedy. Overcome with grief, he couldn't hold back his tears. Investigators treated him with respect, allowing him time to gather himself before beginning their questioning. Jeremy shared everything he knew, including the hardships Sheila went through, and the argument that had occurred at the dinner table on the evening of August 6, shortly before he decided to leave the house. At first glance, the crime that Sheila committed seemed to be an act of desperation and impulsivity, because at the time, she was suffering from mental illness. After hearing Neville and June's suggestion that she should return her 2 sons to the orphanage, she felt the interference in her private life was unacceptable. When she lost control, she grabbed a weapon and shot Neville, June, Daniel, Nicholas, and finally shoot yourself. Investigators believe this is what happened. However, there is one very strange detail. Sheila had been shot twice in different parts of her body. How could she have managed to do this to herself? The actions of the detectives were puzzling. They decided to burn the blood-soaked bedsheets carpet, where the bodies were found. They explained that they wanted to help Jeremy avoid the painful memories of the incident. Furthermore, the weapon discovered at the crime scene, which was a key piece of evidence, was improperly handled by the investigator. They picked it up with their bare hands without wearing gloves. A few days later, Bamber's family funeral was held, and Jeremy attended. He seemed distraught over the tragedy, weeping over the coffins of his sister, parents, and nephews. However, on that day, the investigation was reopened. Relatives of Bamber's family have expressed concerns about Jeremy's unusual behavior. Despite his tears, he made odd remarks, such as referring to himself as the boss. They found him smiling with the look of someone satisfied with victory. They reported this to police, causing police to conduct a more thorough investigation. Crime scenes need to be investigated carefully and meticulously to avoid drawing hasty conclusions. The detectives began by examining the weapon. They discovered fingerprints from several individuals, including the investigator who had handled the gun without gloves. The appearance of Sheila and Jeremy's fingerprints is not surprising. Jeremy admitted the gun was his, explaining he had purchased it for hunting. It is also understandable that Sheila's fingerprints were on the gun, as the initial theory suggested she had used the gun as the murder weapon. A few days later, Jeremy's cousin secretly went to the Bamber family home to search the house. He convinced that Sheila was not involved in the murder. By this point, Jeremy had inherited to his family home and was living there alone. During the search, the cousin inspected every room and the closet, and he found a silencer for a .22 caliber carbine. Length of the gun, combined with the silencer, made it impossible for the attacker to have turned the weapon on themselves and fired. This discovery strongly suggested that Sheila could not have been the perpetrator. If Sheila had fired the gun without the silencer, a new question arises: why were traces of blood found on the end of the silencer? Sheila, who had been shot twice and was bleeding, could not have removed the silencer and hidden it deep in the closet. This suggests that the silencer was attached to the rifle in the murders. From this point, everything started to become clear. Julie, Jeremy's girlfriend, suspects him of being involved in killing his family. She contacted investigators and shared some information. She revealed that on the night of August 7th, Jeremy had called her, saying there were problems. However, when she tried to ask what was wrong, he abruptly hung up. She also recalled that shortly before the murders, he had repeatedly complained about his family. Most importantly, she revealed that the Bamber family had drawn up a will, which stated that all assets would be passed on to their children after their deaths. This made Jeremy very angry. He did not want to share the inheritance with his sister, Sheila. In addition, Jeremy also told Julie that he wanted to kill his family and blame it on Sheila, a mentally ill person. She reported all of this to the police, not because she wanted to help the investigation, but because she was feeling angry, so she had just learned that Jeremy had a new girlfriend. However, there is no direct evidence to prove Jeremy's guilt. He tried to mislead the investigation. He gave the police the name of a suspect, a plumber he'd have hired. However, when investigators questioned the plumber, they learned that he was completely innocent. He also has a solid alibi, helped to remove any suspicion against him. As a result, Jeremy Bamber became the primary suspect. He was taken into custody due to his inability to provide an alibi. However, the police released him after failing to find evidence linking him to the massacre. Surprisingly, he was allowed to leave the country. After inheriting the property, Jeremy's financial situation improved a lot. He sold Neville's car and to Saint-Tropez, France. Upon returning to England on September 29th, he was arrested and charged with the murder of the Bamber family. The trial began on October 3rd. One of the main points raised in court was about Neville's injuries. His body showed multiple bruises, suggesting that he had tried to defend himself from an attack. The medical examiner speculated that the injuries were caused by the same .22 caliber carbine. Sheila, a petite and frail woman, it seemed unlikely that she could have inflicted such severe injuries on her father. In contrast, Jeremy appeared capable of doing so. Neville's body showed signs of a struggle, with multiple bruises. Sheila also received several blows, but there were no signs of a struggle on her body, and her nails remained intact. The defense countered these arguments that believed that Sheila suffered from mental illness, which made her the prime suspect, capable of committing a five-fold murder. They emphasized that she grew up on a farm, was skilled at handling guns, and was an experienced target shooter. Additionally, Jeremy's lawyers highlighted that Sheila's blood was fresher than the rest of the family's, so they claiming that she ended her life after killing others. This, they argued, could have been due to guilt or the sound of approaching police cars. However, the prosecution disputed these claims. If Sheila had been the killer and then end her life, then the policeman on duty near the house, they will hear the last gunshot. However, no sound was detected. Furthermore, Sheila could not have pulled the trigger with the silencer attached, as it would have been out of her reach. The silencer was also found in a closet, rather than on the carbine where it logically should have been. The defense is in a difficult position because it has no arguments to refute the prosecution. According to the prosecution's argument, the motive for the murder stemmed from Jeremy's anger when he learned the contents of the will. In the will, the inheritance was divided equally between him and Sheila. His greed for the inheritance led him to plan a massacre. On August 6th, between 10:30 p.m. and 11 p.m., Jeremy left his relative's house and went home. Later that night, he returned to their house on a bicycle he had taken from his mother, June, a few days earlier. He took a roundabout route and entered the house through an open bathroom window on the first floor. He climbed inside, retrieved the loaded gun, and went to June's bedroom. Then, he shot and killed her with 2 shots. Next, he aimed the gun at Neville, but Neville woke up and tried to defend himself, leading to a fight. During the struggle, he managed to shoot Neville. After killing Neville, Jeremy returned to the bedroom and killed Sheila and her 2 children, Daniel von Nicholas. He then staged the scene to make it look like Sheila was the perpetrator, he placing the carbine in her hands. With his crime complete, he left the house on his bike. He called his girlfriend, Julie, almost revealing what he had done, and then called the police to report that Neville had allegedly called him. However, if Neville was threatened with a weapon, he would contact the police, not Jeremy. Jeremy's actions seemed to make everyone feel strange. Why didn't he come to the crime scene immediately after Neville's call? After considering the evidence and various assumptions, the jury deliberated for 9 hours and reaching a verdict. Ultimately, Jeremy Bamber was convicted of 5 murders and sentenced to 5 life terms in prison with no chance of parole. Jeremy, meanwhile, maintains his innocence. Hello, everyone. Today we will learn about another case. The case of millionaire Ben Novak Jr. In 2009, in New York, Ben Novak Jr. was found dead in a hotel room during a business trip. His hands and feet were bound with duct tape, and a gag was stuffed in his mouth. The 53-year-old died from choking on his own blood after an attack in his eye. Get ready. This story has many important details. First, let's learn about the Novak family. Ben Novak Sr. owned the renowned Fontainebleau Hotel, a 5-star establishment on the Miami coastline. Born in America in 1907, his father Hyman was a Russian immigrant with the original surname Novik. Hyman initially made clothes and later opened his own store, but it struggled financially. He then became a manager at a New York hotel, where he hired his son, Ben, who had a keen interest in the hotel industry. Ben's career flourished, and by age 40, he had become a successful hotelier with a solid income. He moved to Miami and changed the family name from Novick to Novak. Ben was married 3 times. His first wife, Elsie, was with him for about 15 years. They faced challenges in having children, and when they were both over 40, they adopted a boy named Ronald. Unfortunately, after just 2 years, they divorced. Elsie retained ownership of a prestigious hotel that was registered in her name during their marriage. After the divorce, Ben showed no interest in raising Ronald and did not participate in his life at all shortly after the divorce, when 45-year-old Ben Novak started a relationship with 30-year-old model Bernice a year later. In 1952, they formalized their relationship in December 1954. At the age of 47, Ben opened the famous Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami, which featured 500 rooms, 12 restaurants, a nightclub, and a luxurious swimming pool. The hotel became a popular vacation spot for current and former U.S. presidents. High-ranking officials and celebrities also performed there. Many films were filmed at this hotel. In 1956, the Novak family welcomed their long-awaited heir, a boy named Ben Novak Jr., who was affectionately called Benji. He grew up on the hotel grounds with his parents and was often surrounded by adults, including celebrities. Hotel security guards primarily took care of him, and from a young age, Benji dreamed of becoming a police officer. Benji was a spoiled child, often making cruel remarks. As he received everything he asked for from the nannies, his parents were usually busy with work. His father was always occupied with business, while his mother frequently worked at the hotel but tried to spend her free time with him. Ben Novak's second marriage ended in divorce, but he maintained a good relationship with his second wife. After they divorced, Benji continued to live with his father at the hotel. Ben Novak Sr. later remarried, but his third marriage was short-lived and also ended in divorce. Despite this, he continued to spend time with Bernice, and they remained close for the rest of their lives. In 1978, 24 years after the legendary hotel opened, Ben Novak declared bankruptcy due to the business's financial losses. However, he still had millions remaining in his accounts 7 years later. In 1985, he passed away from cardiopulmonary failure at the age of 78. In his will, he left his entire inheritance to Bernice and his only biological son, Ben Novak Jr. It is important to note that he left only $1 to his adopted son, Ronald, whom he had adopted with his first wife at the time of his father's death. Benji was 29 years old. He had previously worked in the police force but became disillusioned with that childhood dream and decided to start his own business. Those close to him noted that Benji transformed from a spoiled child into a bold and ambitious man, often displaying aggression when things didn't go his way. Much like his father, he explored various business ventures, experiencing both successes and failures. Ultimately, he established a company that organized conferences and conventions for other businesses, with Amway being his largest client for many years. In 1991, Benji lived in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, at 35. He had been in several relationships until meeting Narcy. Him realized he was truly in love. Narcy, who was from a large family in Cuba. She moved to the U.S. and worked as a dancer in a nightclub. Where she first met Benji, she already had a daughter, May Abad, from an old marriage, who was then raised by Bernice. Although Bernice wasn't fond of Narcy, she chose not to interfere. Wishing to avoid conflict with her son, Benji and Narcy married in 1991 and started living together. Narcy left her job as a stripper to help Benji with his business and to write books together after their wedding. They enjoyed a lavish lifestyle, affording expensive clothes, dining out, and luxury cars. Additionally, Benji was an avid collector of Batman memorabilia, owning the second largest collection in the world, which included a 1,977 Batmobile. Among other items, he was meticulous about his purchases, always negotiating to get the best prices. In total, his collection was valued at around $2 million. It is worth noting that in Immerse business, Benji saved on everything. He organized conventions for large companies and made a point to cut costs wherever possible. This careful management allowed him to preserve his father's assets, which still contained a significant amount of money, around $10 million that he inherited. Benji frequently traveled for work, as he valued his freedom and did not like being tied down at home. Although he had no health issues, neither he nor Narcy wanted children. When Narcy's daughter grew up, she had 2 sons and began assisting her mother and stepfather with their business. May affectionately called Benji Dad and had a good relationship with him, receiving financial support from him as well. On July 10, 2009, Benji, Narcy, and May traveled from Florida to New York to organize a conference for the Amway Company, which would welcome thousands of participants from various cities. They stayed at the Hilton Hotel in Westchester County. Benji and Narcy in room 455, while May had her own room nearby. 2 days later, around 7 a.m., Narcy left their room to have breakfast in the cafe on the first floor. After a short time, about 40 minutes, she returned to their room. When she found her husband lying face down on the floor, there was a significant amount of blood around him. Benji was bound, and a gag was in his mouth, indicating he had been attacked. Panicked, Narcy called 911. Then she rushed down the corridor, crying out to another hotel guest that her husband had been killed. When the police and medical personnel arrived, they confirmed that Benji was dead. Initially, investigators believed he might have been the target of a robbery. After thoroughly inspecting the room, it was found that nearly all valuables were intact. Benji regularly carried large amounts of cash to conferences, and that money was untouched. The only item missing was a gold bracelet adorned with diamonds and engraved with his name. Investigative agency was revealed that a hotel employee called the Novak family's room at 6:54 a.m. At this time, Benji answered the phone and spoke with the employee about the upcoming conference. This shows he was still alive when Narcy left the room. Security camera footage showed Narcy moving around the hotel and supported her claim that she was having breakfast when her husband was attacked. Although Narcy was taken to the police station for questioning, she completely denied any wrongdoing and claimed she had no knowledge of what happened to Benji. She emphasized to investigators that Benji was a strict and tough person who often upset those around him. She explained that on the night in question, he had worked late into the night and went to bed only after sunrise. So she had breakfast on her own at 7:15 a.m. She went downstairs to the cafe, where she spoke with a hotel employee. The employee mentioned that they did not expect many attendees at the conference. As a result, many participants are forced to buy plastic plate because they fit the budget. After this conversation, Narcy tried to call Benji on his mobile phone to share this disappointing news, but he did not answer, thinking he was simply asleep. So Narcy did not feel concerned. Narcy went to the conference room to assess the situation. Afterward, she returned to her own room and sensed something was off, but Narcy chose to take a shower. Once she entered the bedroom, she discovered Benji dead and urgently called 911. The police and ambulance arrived at 7:57 a.m. Upon investigating, the police found no forced entry. The hotel room doors were secure. The keycard data revealed that Narcy had opened the door at midnight and again at 7:04 a.m. She could not remember exactly whether she closed the door behind her when she left in the morning or if she forgot to do it. Allowing someone to get inside without a key card During a lengthy 12-hour interrogation, Narcy acknowledged that she and Benji often engaged in bondage during sex, and that he enjoyed it. This raised questions about why Benji was found in an unusual position. Narcy explained that on that morning, she had tied him up during their sexual activities and left, intending for him to wait and become more aroused. She also recounted an incident in which Benji had broken her nose and then sent her to a plastic surgeon to fix it when she woke up from the surgery. She discovered that silicone breast implants had also been inserted without her consent when asked if she had any role in her husband's death. Narcy firmly replied, "No," she added. "If you suspect me, then bring the electric chair. I'm ready to sit on it right now. I don't want to suffer. Let me do it right now." Investigators interviewing Narcy noted that her emotional responses appeared to lack sincerity. The following day, July 13, she failed a lie detector test but was released due to insufficient evidence shortly after. The autopsy results for Benji were revealed. It was confirmed that he had been attacked while sleeping. He sustained a blow to the head from a blunt object, was bound, and gagged. The attacker also his eyes, and Benji ultimately died from choking on his own blood next to Benji's body. Police discovered a pair of cheap, fake glasses resembling a well-known brand. Narcy claimed the glasses were hers. They had broken, and she had given them to Benji for repair. Detectives found it odd that a wealthy woman would own such inexpensive fakes. Those close to Benji described Narcy as very jealous. On one occasion, Narcy caught her husband with another woman, leading her to erupt in jealousy and threatened to burn their house down. However, following Benji's death, she denied these claims, asserting that such incidents had never occurred. Detectives investigated Benji's banking transactions and discovered that he had been paying for an apartment in Florida for the past 2 years. Rebecca Bliss lived in this apartment. She had moved to America from Lebanon and previously worked in adult films. But after meeting Benji in 2007, she stopped doing dirty filming. Rebecca was Benji's mistress, and he covered all her expenses. He managed to keep this secret relationship hidden for a long time. However, just a few months before Benji's death, Narcy learned about the affair. She confronted Rebecca and offered make to her $10 to end the relationship with Benji and stay away from him. But Rebecca declined the offer. No one was certain if Benji intended to leave his wife, but it was clear that, if they divorced, Narcy would receive only $65 and relocation expenses according to their marriage contract. But now, Benji's multi-million-dollar fortune would ultimately be transferred to her. Investigative agency was revealed that 7 years earlier, in 2002, Benji had already been the victim of a home invasion. 2 unknown men broke into his home, tied him up, and held him hostage for an entire day without food or water. They stole valuables and cash totaling $400. Benji later told his friends that he believed Narcy orchestrated the attack instead of going to the police. He filed for divorce. Following this, Narcy began to spread harmful rumors about Benji's sexual preferences. In response, he retracted his divorce filing and continued to live with Narcy, insisting that he loved her deeply. During the investigation, detectives discovered that Bernice had sadly passed away just 3 months earlier, on April 4, 2009. At that time, she, 87-year-old, lived alone in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, as reported. After parking her car in the driveway, she got out and immediately tripped and fell, injuring her face and head. Once inside her home, she went to the bathroom to clean herself up, but fell several more times. She lay on the floor for 2 days without being able to call for help. Her body was found a week later. An autopsy revealed that Bernice had a broken jaw and teeth, along with skull injuries. Given her age and the circumstances, investigators concluded that her death was accidental. Relatives remembered Bernice as an active elderly woman who took care of herself. She called Benji every day and had a good relationship with May. Benji was deeply saddened by his mother's death and threw himself into work to distract himself from his grief. However, As time went on, he began to suspect that his mother's death was not an accident. After Benji's death, Narcy returned to her home in Florida, where May accused her of being responsible for her stepfather's death. This led to a major argument between Narcy and May, during which Narcy struck her daughter with a metal crowbar. Neighbors intervened to separate them and urged them to calm down. 10 days after, the police received an anonymous letter written in Spanish. The letter claimed that Narcy was involved in Benji's death and suggested investigating her brother, 57-year-old Cristobal Velas, who lived in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and worked as a bus driver. The police located Cristobal and questioned him, but he denied any involvement in Benji's death. Detectives gathered information about Cristobal and were immediately interested in the money transfers that he had made in the last month. Cristobal had sent money to a man named Alejandro Garcia, who had a criminal history and a noticeable physical characteristic. He had only one healthy eye. The other was damaged. He almost always wore glasses to hide the defect. The detectives started to suspect that Cristobal had paid Alejandro for the murder of Benji. The crime occurred at the Hilton Hotel, where there were numerous CCTV cameras. The detectives soon found video footage of Alejandro at the hotel. Accompanied by another man named Joel Gonzalez, the police began to monitor the locations and bank transactions of both men, and discovered that Alejandro and Joel had been living in South Florida for several months after Benji's death. Investigators were exploring the possibility that Narcy had Benji murdered because she feared he would leave her for his mistress, leaving her with nothing. After her husband's death, Narcy, still in New York, received $100 from his company as the main suspect in the case. She was not entitled to inherit his assets upon returning to Florida. Narcy began selling Benji's and Bernice's property. Keeping all the profits for herself, she sold many valuables, including part of a Batman toy collection. In August 2009, Narcy appeared at the bank with the keys to 3 safes in which Benji's valuables and papers were kept. She deceived the bank employees by saying that her husband would arrive in a few hours and give his consent, even though, at that time, 7 weeks had passed since Benji's death. Nobody knew what was inside. Before Narcy emptied the safes and left, Benji's body remained in the morgue for an extended period while the investigation continued. It was only 2 months after his death that he was finally buried in Queens County, New York, next to his father's grave. In November 2009, police summoned Alejandro and Joel for questioning. Initially, both men denied their involvement, but then they confessed. The investigators explained that Cristobal had found them and brought them to New York. At that time, Narcy was dining with Benji at the Hilton Hotel restaurant. While Alejandro and Joel sat at a nearby table, Narcy stroked Benji's hair and subtly signaled to the mercenaries who their target was. On the morning of July 12, while Benji was still asleep, Narcy invited Alejandro and Joel into their room. They assaulted the sleeping Benji with a baton, while Narcy directed their actions at her request. They even gouged out Benji's eyes. Cristobal then paid Alejandro thousands of dollars because carrying out the attack on the Novak family. Investigators found material evidence, including cheap glasses belonging to one of the mercenaries, which confirmed that Alejandro and Joel had been at the scene. In July 2010, a year after the crime, Narcy and Cristobal were arrested at the same time. The prosecutor's office reopened the investigation into the death of Bernice. This new investigation uncovered evidence that Bernice had also been murdered. A neighbor reported seeing 2 men in black clothing approaching Bernice's house and hiding behind the garage during a plea bargain. Alejandro confessed that he and Joel were responsible for attacking Bernice at Narcy's request. They used a gas wrench to beat Bernice, which led to her death. In April 2011, Narcy and Cristobal were charged with Bernice's murder as well. The primary motive for these contract killings was a multi-million-dollar inheritance. Narcy and Cristobal went on trial in 2012. where they both denied any involvement in the deaths of Benji and Bernice. During the trial, the investigation agency was revealed that Narcy had a secret phone at 6:39 a.m. on July 12, 2009. She used this phone to call Alejandro and Joel, inviting them to her room. They arrived at the correct floor and entered the room, which was not monitored by cameras after the murder took place. Narcy left the room casually, as if nothing had happened, and went to the first floor to establish an alibi. She had a meal at a cafe, conversed with a hotel employee, and then proceeded to a conference room. In court, when asked who, in her opinion, could have ordered the murder of Bernice and Benji, Narcy pointed her finger at her own daughter, May. Cristobal agreed with Narcy, stating that the idea belonged to May. The court also heard that after the arrest of Alejandro and Joel, a photograph of May was found in their pocket. May was to become the third victim. After the authorities discovered that May's life was in danger, she was asked to move to New York. It turned out that while still at large, Narcy hired a detective to collect dirt on May. The detective followed her and her sons, rummaged through their trash can, and collected personal belongings while living in New York. May quickly ran out of money. A local officer lent her $5,000 soon. May returned the money, but the officer lost his job because he was accused of paying May to give false testimony in court. Ultimately, Narcy and Cristobal were found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, domestic violence, stalking, money laundering, and witness tampering. They were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Narcy is ineligible to claim her late husband's estate. Alejandro and Joel were also found guilty of contract killings of 2 people. They were sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole 30 years later. Other participants in this high-profile case were also found. Dennis Ramirez, the son-in-law of Cristobal, pleaded guilty to the fact that on July 12, he drove Alejandro and Joel to the Hilton Hotel after the crime. Dennis admitted their involvement in the crime and received a less severe punishment. One of the key pieces of evidence that helped bring the case to a close was an anonymous letter in Spanish that was submitted to police 10 days after the murder, written by both Narcy's sister and Cristobal, who lived in Florida. She confirmed that it was at Narcy's request that Bernice was killed. Then Benji, and the next victim was supposed to be May, while Benji was still alive. He left his will inheritance to Narcy, and in her will, she persuaded to Benji include May there. After Narcy's conviction, May became the sole heir to her stepfather's multi-million-dollar fortune. But the story does not end there. Whenever it comes to a large inheritance, everything is decided quite a long time and is calculated in decades. The fortune of May was really large. 2 houses in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, where Benji and Bernice lived, 9 expensive cars, and also the Batmobile, a white yacht, Lightning, and a bunk barge, large bank accounts, with life insurance payouts for Benji and Bernice. Over the years of litigation, there have been people claiming to be Benji's, and they have tried to claim the inheritance. Benji's first adopted son, Ronald, who hit rock bottom in the 2000s and even lived in the woods, suffered from mental disorders. His mother, Elsie, died in 2001, leaving her adopted son a fairly large inheritance. However, Ronald was nowhere to be found. They couldn't find him and reported him missing in 2008, just 2 days before he was declared dead. Ronald suddenly showed up and took over his adoptive mother Elsie's inheritance due to mental health issues. Ronald's money was put into a trust. Ronald was paid $400 a week and also had all his medical care paid for a year after Benji died. Ronald started fighting over his inheritance. He had enough money to hire a good lawyer and tried to sue for the property of Benji. Ronald tried to prove that May was included in Novak's will under pressure from Narcy. He attempted to deprive May of the right to inherit her stepfather, but he failed. For a decade, May Abad fought for her stepfather's money once. She needed a fairly large sum of money for her son's operation. The boy had heart problems. Then May received $50,000 from Novak's assets. Eventually, May, together with her sons, became the full heirs of the Novak family fortune. However, over the years of litigation, the total amount of the inheritance has significantly decreased. The case of Ben Novak Jr. not only exposes the greed and cold calculation of a wealthy family, but also highlights the human nature when caught up in the whirlwind of money and power. Through the involvement of Narchi, her brother Cristobal, the case proves that the most brutal acts sometimes come from those closest. The consequences include not only life sentences for the conspirators, but also the complete collapse of a family empire that was once seen as a symbol of success. The case leaves a profound reminder of the dangers of greed, betrayal, and bad choices, and becomes one of the most haunting crime stories in American history. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Jack and Jennifer Edwards. John Edwards was born on July 12, 1950 in Broken Hill, Australia. He faced difficult challenges in his childhood due to his alcoholic parents. At the age of 17, he stole his mother's car and ran away, leaving a short goodbye note. His family could not take him back, and he chose to cut off most of his ties with them. John began working to support himself, trying out various jobs until he was attracted by an opportunity with the Australian Department of Defence. In June, he joined the army until 2005. John has been married to 5 women, resulting in 8 children. For privacy reasons, the names of most of these women are not disclosed. His first relationship began when he was 18 in the 1960s, and they married. This marriage produced 2 children, a son and a daughter. John's first wife described him as controlling. He would restrict her spending money and occasionally come home late without notice. But overall, she was happy with their life. However, after a vacation in the United States with their children, the wife then noticed that John was frequently texting another woman he met in Boston. Unable to forgive him for his infidelity, she decided to end their relationship. John stayed in the United States with his mistress and wanted to keep the children, but his ex-wife took them with her that year. He married the Boston woman, but their marriage quickly ended. Due to his aggressive behavior, John returned home alone and tried to reconnect with his first wife. He often visited his children on weekends. Over time, his son and daughter became afraid of his outbursts. His relationship with his ex-wife also began to deteriorate. John's behavior became increasingly out of control, and eventually, his children lost interest in seeing him because of his violent nature. However, John insisted that his ex-wife was the root of the problem. He believed that she was the one who caused the discord between him and his children. He then became increasingly angry and made threatening phone calls to her. He blamed everyone for the problems he faced in his life. John's behavior toward his children did not improve. His son and daughter were terrified of him and tried to avoid any interaction. Despite his fear, John insisted on visiting them. In 1977, he began a new relationship and soon moved in with his girlfriend. They had a daughter 2 years later. In 1984, they married and had a son. But things continued to deteriorate. During this time, John's treatment of his third wife became increasingly abusive. She was pregnant, but John's violent behavior caused her to lose the baby. John's rages became increasingly frightening. He assaulted his third wife, threw objects at her, and even threatened to set her on fire while she slept. By the end of the year, the situation had become so unbearable that she decided to leave him, but was too afraid to speak out. Fearing for her life, she had prepared in advance and gathered the children together, waiting for him to go to the bathroom. She saw this as the perfect opportunity to escape with the children. The woman climbed over the fence with the children and with the help of neighbors. She contacted the police. John was subsequently arrested. John's third wife and children then sought refuge in the city. Thinking they would be safe, all of John's children described their father's cruelty, aggressive outbursts, and emotional manipulation. Unfortunately, their concerns were ignored by social services. John had 2 daughters and 2 sons by 2 different women, and he was involved in custody disputes with both, despite numerous reports from his ex-wives of his violent behavior and the children's reluctance to see him. He continued to seek permission to see them. The children were required to spend 3 nights a week with John. Despite their apparent unwillingness, social services did not intervene. The mothers reported receiving threats and fearing for their children's safety. Family members confirmed that John had been acting inappropriately and aggressively. But the legal system ignored this evidence. In December, a warrant was issued for John's arrest after he took his daughter home from school without permission and held her for several days. A similar incident had occurred with his son, but police believed the father had done nothing wrong. They thought he was just trying to bond with his children. Eventually, John's first wife was able to completely cut off contact with him. By then, their daughter was old enough to choose whether or not to continue contact with her father. Unsurprisingly, she decided to cut off all ties and ignored all attempts to contact him after receiving the restraining order. The family felt relieved, however. The third ex-wife continued to face pressure from John and had no way to protect herself. Meanwhile, John continued to try to build his own life. He began dating a woman in the 90s, and she eventually had a son with him. By that time, their relationship had ended. John began to stalk her, insisting that he wanted to maintain a relationship with their child. Eventually, the young woman came under his influence again and continued to keep in close contact with him. John promised to change, but this was typical behavior of a manipulator. At this point, he became increasingly cruel and aggressive, and the new woman quickly realized her mistake. She moved in with John and then moved out. Living with him was extremely stressful. She lost a lot of weight and was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. However, she eventually found the strength to leave with her child. She turned to the police for protection, and with the help of various organizations, she found a home where she could hide from John. Later, he discovered her address and repeatedly showed up. Trying to break down the door and threaten her, John made several attempts to kidnap her son and eventually pressured the woman into giving him partial custody. As a result, the boy would occasionally stay at his father's house, where John also had 2 children with his third wife. When those children grew up, they chose to cut ties with their father. John later remarried, a skillful manipulator. He knew how to charm women, showering them with attention and affection. John's new wife became pregnant, but he forced her to have an abortion, and she refused. This angered him. John then made the situation worse by attacking her, pushing her down the stairs and beating her for a long time. It appeared that he intended to harm the child. As the 5th wife claimed, he aimed for her stomach with each blow. Despite his violence, she defended herself, and the child was delivered safely. John's 5th wife then fled to women's shelters to escape him. However, he found her and arranged meetings while constantly threatening her and demanding her to return to protect her child. She sought a divorce and sole custody of the child, which she was granted in September 2000. Tragically, in 2008, his 5th wife was diagnosed with a terminal illness and died in September, leaving John with custody of their 8-year-old son. By that time, John had 6 children with 4 different women, each of whom he had negatively impacted. In October 2000, John met 19-year-old Olga from Russia on a dating website. Charming and polite, John showered her with compliments and described his homeland as a wonderful place. Their romance began, and Olga flew to Australia at John's invitation to be with him. She moved in with him in August 2001, and they married on November 10 of that year. Their son Jack was born in September 2002 and daughter Jennifer in August 2004. Jack and Jennifer grew up in their family home in the quiet Sydney suburb of Pett Hills. Known for its natural beauty and close-knit community, however, John treated Olga in much the same way as he had treated his previous wives. He was verbally abusive and sought to control her every move, unlike her previous partners. Olga found herself with no choice, with nowhere to run and no one to help her. Faced with these circumstances, Olga tried to adapt and keep the peace at the slightest sign of disobedience. John would threaten to take their children away and deport her back to Russia, fearing for her children. Olga endured the situation. John also controlled their finances, including Olga's salary, and dictated how she should dress and care for herself. His control and cruelty created an environment in which she felt extremely miserable. Jack was a kind, adventurous, an active young man who loved sports and video games. He was also very friendly and got along well with everyone around him. His younger sister, Jennifer, was quieter and calmer than him. She enjoyed spending hours reading, loved animals, and loved skateboarding. As she grew up, she had a dog and a pet rabbit. She spent a lot of time playing with her pets, driven by her love of animals. She dreamed of becoming a veterinarian, a goal she often shared with her classmates and family. When Jack was about 10 years old, John began abusing him. John treated Jack the same way he had treated his wife. Jack reacted and disobeyed his father. In response, John resorted to cruel methods to inflict pain on Jack without leaving visible marks, such as breaking his fingers with heavy objects. This bullying continued for years, leaving the boy in constant fear. He often tried to call the police for help, but his mother prevented him from doing so each time, fearing that she might lose him. To cope, Jack began sleeping with a baseball bat in his room, only feeling safe when it was hidden under his pillow. During this time, Jennifer, who also witnessed the abuse, began sleeping with a knife under her pillow in 2015. During this time, the family's trip to Paris turned chaotic when a serious fight broke out between Jack and his father, John. Jack ran out of the hotel, but John chased him down the street, assaulting him by pinning him against a wall and choking him. The situation escalated, prompting passers-by to intervene. Jack then wanted to call the police, but his mother begged him not to. He complied, but the violence continued. With John becoming increasingly angry, the father's cruelty worsened over time. In December 2015, Olga decided that she could no longer tolerate his behavior and expressed her intention to file for divorce. John begged her to stay, promising to change. Olga eventually gave him another chance, but things only got worse. In January 2016, Olga became concerned and contacted the police after her son, Jack, went missing. Fortunately, the police found him within a few hours. It turned out that Jack had run away from home and did not want to return to avoid danger. Although it was clear that Jack was in a dangerous situation, the police returned him to Olga's family. Tensions continued to rise until March 2016, when Olga finally decided to take the children. On March 11, she went to a neighboring city to stay with friends, during which time she learned about John's stalking of her and his ex-wives. Fearing for her safety, she asked her friends not to reveal her whereabouts. However, despite these precautions, a friend accidentally led John to the house where Olga and the children were hiding. In April 2016, a trial began for Olga and John. Olga, along with the children, sought a protection order against John to ensure their safety. In response, John stated in court that the children were in danger of being cared for by their mother without him. During this time, he also consulted a psychiatrist who diagnosed him with anxiety and depression. However, the psychotherapist noted that John was generally doing well. John used this situation to prove that he was actively working on his problems. The court ruled that John must be informed about the whereabouts of his son and daughter. However, the court also decided that John must not come within 500 meters of Olga and the children. Despite this, he continued to follow them and try to contact them one day. He went to Jennifer's school and tried to give her a dog. He also met Jack at the police station and wanted to send him a letter of apology. Meanwhile, John hired a private investigator to spy on his family. In February 2017, a private investigator found Olga at a yoga studio. John later confessed to the police that he regularly went to the studio to work out. The staff noticed his strange behavior and believed that he was there primarily to stalk women. When Olga reported John for violating the restraining order, police dismissed her complaint and accepted John's explanation that it was accidental. Olga claimed that the situation was clearly a case of stalking, but her complaint was ignored. John later went to the police station to file a report that he disputed Olga's allegations against him. His intention was to increase his chances of gaining custody of the children, but that didn't help him. In February 2018, the court granted Olga sole custody of the children, and they were not required to have contact with their father. Olga and the children were relieved to believe that they had finally secured their safety. However, the real struggle was just beginning. On June 25, 2018, John Edwards rented a car and began stalking Olga and the children. He visited a computer expert and deleted all the data from his hard drive and browser. On the 4th of July, he took the weapon out of his locker at 4:45 p.m. Jennifer got off the school bus and sent a text message, not realizing that John was following her around 5 p.m. Jennifer's neighbor heard several loud bangs and ran to the porch, where he saw John leaving the house. The neighbor tried to ask John what had happened, but John quietly got into his car and drove away, realizing the danger. The neighbor knocked on the door, but received no response. The neighbor then quickly called the police and reported the situation. When the police arrived and entered the house, they found Jennifer and her uncle Jack under the computer desk in Jack's room. Both without any signs of life. They had been killed. Possibly while trying to escape the attacker, Jack was found lying on top of Jennifer, bravely shielding and protecting his sister. Olga returned home. Confused about what had just happened, police cars surrounded her house, and a helicopter hovered overhead. She learned that her son and daughter were dead, and that her ex-husband was wanted by the police. Olga immediately suspected that John was the only person capable of committing such a crime. The police decided to put Olga's house under surveillance, fearing that she might be the next target. However, he never showed up. The next morning, at around 6 a.m., the police arrived at John's house. They discovered that after the tragic incident involving the children, John, 67, returned home and took his own life. A neighbor reported that at around 6 p.m. the previous day, while walking his dog, he heard a loud bang coming from John's house. The neighbor then took his dog home, but later returned to investigate. The neighbor noticed a broken window, but was unable to enter the house. The police discovered a crumpled piece of paper in John's pocket that contained Jennifer's daily bus schedule to and from school. In the garage, they found a toolbox filled with shredded documents, burned papers, a broken tablet, and a broken cell phone. They also recovered 2 handguns from the house, which were confirmed through analysis to be the weapons used in the murders of Jack and Jennifer. The investigation revealed that the motive for the murders was related to a custody dispute. At this point, all of John's older children had stopped contacting him, and all of his ex-wives had filed restraining orders against him. John, feeling that he had lost everything, he decided to kill his children. This was not a spur-of-the-moment decision. He had meticulously planned this crime. First, he bought the weapons to commit the crime. Then, he mapped out the children's daily routine, the school bus schedule, and his wife's working hours. John also made numerous online searches related to his plan. He deleted his browsing history and destroyed all notes to hide his tracks. But some information was still recovered. The tragic events did not stop there. Olga was deeply saddened and could not bear the loss of her children. seeing Olga in pain. Her mother came from Russia to support her. She took care of Olga and encouraged her mentally, hoping to help her heal. However, after a while, the mother had to return home. 4 months later, against her mother's advice, Olga decided to stay in Australia. Tragically, just 5 months after her 2 children were murdered. Olga also passed away for a long time. Olga lived in the house where John had murdered their son and daughter, often sleeping in her son's bed. It was in this house that a neighbor found Olga's body. The heartbreaking story of Olga and her children captured the public's attention. The children still suffered daily abuse and were forced to sleep near weapons. Separating themselves from their abusive father proved difficult, and the authorities largely ignored Olga's many complaints in response to public pressure and concerns that the case might be covered up. The state police department launched an internal investigation to determine what factors contributed to the tragic event. The investigation found that a number of police officers had been negligent in their duties. There were no reports of harassment in yoga classes, and attempts to contact the children, despite court restrictions, went unpunished even during the struggle. Olga encountered opposition. The lawyer did not consider John dangerous. He completely ignored existing restraining orders issued by all of his ex-wives. An investigation was launched into the lawyer's conduct in custody cases. The defense lawyer ignored the testimony of the teenagers, who reported that John had repeatedly emotionally abused them. He claimed that he did not find their testimony credible because they were too young. This negligence allowed John to continue his harmful behavior unchecked. The situations involving Olga, Jack, and Jennifer have highlighted weaknesses in the Australian system and prompted a re-evaluation of social protection and guardianship policies around the world. Efforts to modernize the system have begun, with the aim of improving the response to domestic violence. The lack of oversight from social services and the police allowed John not only to take the lives of his 2 children, but also to escape the consequences of his actions. John Edwards will always be remembered as a murderer who did not have the courage to face the consequences of his actions.